Well, I think Peter. Wait. Okay. I do that a lot. I want to just.
Yeah, I think we're live. It's good to be back. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. This was an important week with ceasefire in Gaza. So we are going to begin on today's discussion with Shantanu is going to talk about the ceasefire and the week that was. And then Dr. Montero is going to talk about the crisis of the two-party system.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. Good to have some of our comrades back, some of them not here, but hopefully not for long. And yeah, I think I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the developments that have happened this week. I am going to try to not focus too much on the details of what happened because, well, we don't really know a lot of what happened. And a lot of the things are still under wraps, still being fleshed out. And what will happen still remains to be seen. But what I did want to talk about today, what I want to begin with, is this phenomenon of Trump. For 8 or 9 years, I think Trump has been considered a threat to democracy. He has been considered every bad thing that you can think of in the book. Fascist, anti-woman, anti-liberalism, anti-progressive, everything. And there have been a slew of anti-Trump movements over the years. And we can actually really see how the ruling elite of this country has managed to, as we talked about once before, influence this whole of society approach with this massive, institutional structure, managed to make this concerted effort to make this man an enemy of the people. And so far as to when the Israel and Hamas war started and this genocide in Gaza started in October 2023, there were a large number of protest movements across the United States. But when it came to the Democratic National Convention, there was a very mild movement. There was a very we don't want to say too much against the Democratic Party for actually aiding and abetting genocide for 1 year, because we don't want Trump to win. And why is that? Because we think that the Democratic Party and Biden and Harris are the lesser of two evils. That if Trump comes into power, he's going to be as bad, if not worse. He's going to make stronger ties with Israel. He's going to continue the genocide. He's going to send more money because he's a warmonger. All of this rhetoric we saw constantly being floated around. And even those who are quote unquote part of the left, like AOC, said Harris is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire, which we all knew was utter garbage. And now we have the proof in the pudding, so as to say. What does it really say when a president-elect who has not even assumed the seat of power, he hasn't even been inaugurated, when because of him and his Middle Eastern envoy, we have managed to get a ceasefire agreement on the table, which the Israeli cabinet approved yesterday after deliberation for a long time. And what does that really mean? And I think if we look at this really from a perspective of the people, we can see that the reason why Trump won in November 2024 is not entirely because of economics. It's not entirely because of material conditions. The people of America are war weary. They distrust the government and the government adjacent institutions, and they're afraid of constant surveillance, and they are disgusted by the deaths of thousands of children in Gaza. And they are disgusted by the deaths of thousands of children at home in America and those who are living in poverty and squalor. Um, so, having said that, I just wanted to come back to the fact that Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, who's a largely unknown person, really. He's a real estate developer, I think, and with no ties to diplomacy, never had any experience in that. And he was sent to Qatar about 3 weeks after Trump's win, and he engaged in conversation with the Qataris and Netanyahu, and um, and that was the period of time when we got a lot of news about a ceasefire, an impending ceasefire, and all of this news about how Hamas is trying to back out, and Hamas is not agreeing to all these terms, and um, Biden's mediators were absolutely ineffectual. They had failed. And at that point, even the Israeli security people were saying that this is all Netanyahu, like he's not letting all of this, like any of these talks progress further. And he has a reason for that. Like Netanyahu's government, as we know, is backed by these far right parties. His government is a coalition of certain far right parties with people, with absolute maniacs like Itamar Ben Gvir and what's that other guy's name? Smotrich, who have threatened continuously that they will remove their support and they will bring about the fall of Netanyahu's government if he even thinks about agreeing to a ceasefire deal. Now, in the middle of all of this, we are looking at the daily bombardment of hundreds of people, daily bombardment of hundreds of people. I think the latest Lancet, article that came out said that we have 64,000 people, mostly women and children, who have died in Gaza. And that is not counting those who they have not found, those who are buried in the rubble, those who are injured, those who are suffering from disease and starvation and are on the brink of death. Because as we know that Israel has imposed a humanitarian block on the Gaza Strip as well. And it is significant that Biden, all of this time, has been saying that, after Yahya Sinwar's death, everything would be normalized, everything would be fine after that, the Israelis would retreat. But even after Yahya Sinwar was assassinated, Netanyahu says, no ceasefire, we will not be removing Israeli troops from the Gaza Strip, and we will kill every single person in that place. Now, on the one hand, there are people who look at Trump and Netanyahu's relationship and think that, Netanyahu is going to deliver a ceasefire to Trump and not to Biden because he wants to gain favor with Trump.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me at least, makes no sense, because after a ceasefire is reached, Netanyahu will probably be put into prison. He will probably go to jail, or he will probably be forced to move out of politics indefinitely. So things are not looking good for him. So he would not want this. We have discussed here in the free school that the West and the ruling elite of the West constantly need a crisis in order to rule. That is why they're so bad at imagining a theory of crisis. And and we have seen this, you know, and we've seen this right from after the Cold War, where there has been crisis after crisis after crisis that has been engineered and used in order for the US to have this hegemonic neo-colonial, neo-imperialist control over the rest of the world. But all of this rhetoric about Trump being the end of democracy, Trump being the one who's going to be the one to finish all the Palestinians, has fallen flat on its face. All the anti-Trump people have now to contend with the fact that it is this man and his Middle Eastern envoy who went in there on Shabbat, told Netanyahu to get his butt down to the negotiation chamber and say, okay, we need to get this done before Trump's inauguration. They talked on Wednesday. Netanyahu tried to delay it on Thursday. Finally, the cabinet voted and agreed to the ceasefire on Friday. And a lot of people have a lot of things to say about, okay, this is not going to go forward. This is not, the phase one will fail and everything. But what is significant, and it's true, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't really know what's going to happen. But what was achieved is a concrete reality, which is that this is the same ceasefire deal which was on the table since May of 2024. And Netanyahu has run circles around Biden's mediators, and everything that we have been saying, that the US has the power to stop this war if it wanted to,
Right.
has been proven true. It has also shattered this myth that the Zionist lobby controls everything. It has, and Witkoff, who is not a part of Trump's cabinet, is also very telling. We've had discussions at the Free School about what Trump's cabinet picks really mean. He has chosen people like Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio, who are neocon warmongers. But they weren't chosen to go and represent the US in the Middle East, which is the center of crisis at this point in time. It was a close ally of Trump who was sent to the Middle East, who did all of these negotiations in a very short period of time, said, I don't care if you have Shabbat, we have to get this done. I do not care.
Right.
This really tells us that Trump has no ideological commitments to Zionism. He does not care. He wants what he wants. We can say a lot of bad things about Trump, runs off at the mouth. He's not the panacea that we are seeking, but we have to admit what he's been able to achieve. It is a question whether we would have been able to achieve this if Trump or Harris won. Let's ask that question. So Steve Witkoff went in there, and I think he said in certain interviews that Trump had given him the authority to speak on his behalf and speak emphatically. And basically, we don't know the details, but I think what happened is Steve Witkoff, as a mediator, said the US is going to stop backing you. We've sent you $25 billion since October 7th, 2023, and we are going to stop backing you. And you have no choice in the matter, really. Or you have a choice, and the choice is between non-existence and peaceful coexistence. You either get along or you don't exist anymore. So and with that, I think I would like to make certain I don't know, assertions I can say about what this means for the Trump administration moving forward. I think it is important to ask the question that what this means for the US administration moving forward. Are we really backing out of this military industrial complex? Are we moving towards a peace industrial complex? What would a peace administration mean for America, for its people and the ruling elite, who have ruled under crisis for so long? You know, what does this mean for the quote unquote Zionist lobby, for example? How much power can they hope to retain under a Trump administration? We have evidence, and the free school saw this coming in a way, because we talked about how Trump on Truth Social put that video of Jeffrey Sachs where Jeffrey Sachs called Netanyahu an SOB and also exposed the CIA and Netanyahu for indulging in wars in the Middle East in the past, engineered wars in the Middle East. So Trump did, in fact, force Netanyahu to accept this ceasefire agreement, completely counterintuitive to the propaganda that he would be worse than Harris or Biden. And I can't stress this enough, and I was feeling this a lot, that this proves that this could have been stopped at any point. It could have been stopped on October 8th. And every next day after that. But it wasn't, and we had to experience the deaths of so many people. So, Tony Blinken, Matt Miller, Linda Thomas Greenfield, whoever all these people are who have been vocally supporting this genocide, and it's a shame, and I hope you get your just deserts. The other point that I wanted to make is how this has been a victory for the American people. This has been a victory for the American people because it is because of the American people who did not fall for all the endless propaganda, all the virtue signaling, and actually did manage to make their voice heard, elected Trump, who is against war, who does not care about NATO, doesn't care about Canada or Europe, which is failing. It's failing. He seems to care about America and the American people. And one of the greatest strengths that Trump has is that he's unpredictable. He says something, he does another thing. Nobody can really predict, and that's a great strength. Like last week or the week before last, we were having endless conversations about how the US is going to take over Canada and the Panama Canal and Greenland, and the US is going to extend all its imperialist boundaries. Well, who's to say all of that was not a distraction? Who's to say that all of that was just him, just Trump being Trump, distract and then do things. Israel has failed. I can say that. Israel said that they would defeat Hamas and the resistance movement. They have failed to do that. After 15 months and dropping of thousands of tons of bombs on this small strip of land, the resistance movement still stands. The Qassam Brigade is probably larger than it was when it started out, with more people joining, and that is what happens when you threaten their lives and their land. I think that apart from being a victory for the American people, this was also a victory for the Palestinian people and their resistance, and all the children who have perished needlessly. And us in the free school, we dedicated the year of Baldwin to the immortal children of Gaza. And I think that their sacrifices have paid off at this time. It is not politicians who make history, it is the people who make history.
Right.
And I would like to impress upon that. It is the American people, the Palestinian people who managed to make this a possibility. And simply saying that this is an economic, political, analysis of what is happening does not at all. You can't really explain what's happening through an economic perspective. You cannot explain, there were so many videos and pictures that were being shared on social media, and Jeremiah shared a lot of them about how the people of Palestine were celebrating the ceasefire, about how it would not mean just a prisoner exchange, it would mean removal of troops, removal of the siege, removal of all of the things that have made the lives of Palestinians a living hell for the last 75 years. I think simply saying that it is an economic or political issue takes away from the agency of people, and we have to recognize their contribution to all of this. Yeah, there is an intense crisis of meaning in the ruling elite at this point in time. And I guess that Doc is going to talk about the crisis of the two-party system. And we must not forget that this past November, the vote was against the two-party system, with people feeling dissatisfied with the two parties, the current predicament that they're under. And I'm just happy that we can finally look forward to an end to all of this.
Can I say something briefly? Can I just say something very briefly? It's helpful to get your account, or not account, but a lot has been coming out on the ceasefire, at least from what I've seen on the news, but also podcasts. And this question that you posed, which is one of the questions that you had posed, which is the role of the Zionist lobby, is something that I've been thinking about, because as the ceasefire has been going through, there are mainstream narratives that are still trying to defend Zionism. And I try to listen to it to get a sense of what the response is to the ceasefire as well in mainstream propaganda. And it's disgusting. And sometimes I don't want to listen to it. But part of phase one of this deal is that essentially of the prisoner exchange, or including the prisoner exchange. And it just lacks common sense, because essentially it's 30-something hostages from October 7th compared to the thousands of Palestinians. And essentially one of the narratives that are being told is this is such a deal for Hamas and they should just take it. And among these 30 individuals, they're the young, women, the elderly. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because among the thousands of Palestinians that are still imprisoned, like those are the young and the elderly and the women of Gaza. And in addition to this more than 60,000 that you mentioned. And so just listening to it, I was just bewildered that that was even something that is a line still of the ruling propaganda. And also placing the blame on Hamas as well, which is that they are the ones that are trying to sabotage this deal. They are the ones that are going back and forth, when in fact, what you've highlighted is that it was on Netanyahu and the far right as well that were pushing back on it. And I am happy for what has happened, but then also all the losses that have happened in this time as well, which is like you hear accounts of people, which is like, this is good, but I have lost so much, like my son or my child. So that was just briefly when you had posed the question of like, the role of Zionist lobby, also on the media, so forth.
Just to add, I think also, yeah, it's good to be back after not being in free school for a long time. But I feel like you carry free school with you everywhere you go in the way that I guess you carry
God.
America everywhere you go. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that the past year and a half of this genocide in Gaza has irreversibly changed humanity in a way that I don't think that we will fully reconcile or recognize, I think, or like the impacts of it. I don't know if we'll be fully able to grasp for a long time. I think that's both new possibilities, I think, in terms of like the world and in terms of like humanity and like politics and all that stuff, but also, yeah, like you guys have been saying, like all the people who've been killed who didn't need to be killed. And I think that's, yeah, it's been difficult, I think, to even make sense of like the ceasefire thing, like on an emotional level, because I think most of us in different ways have kind of carried what's been going on in Gaza, at least somewhere like in our spirit or in our hearts for this past year and a half, even if we don't always talk about it. And I think that also pales so much in comparison to what the Palestinian people have actually gone through. And I feel like when the ceasefire deal was announced, it's almost like you're like, is this really happening?
Yeah.
Like, can it really happen? Like, is it really that easy? Is it that simple? Like, did it literally just take like Trump like threatening Netanyahu for this to happen? And I agree with Shantanu that first and foremost, this is a victory for the Palestinian people, and that it's also a victory for the American people and for humanity. Even if all of even if this future itself is uncertain, and even if the possibility of like Netanyahu, the entire Israeli regime, also the U.S. government, the Western governments which have been complicit in this the entire time, even if there is always the possibility that the deal could be scrapped, or obviously Israel has also reneged and kind of gone back on its deals over like many times over the past couple decades. And I think all of that is true, but at the same time, like, yeah, like it is also like a great day for humanity. And I don't know, I just feel like, I think part of it is, yeah, there's just the kind of psychic and emotional and spiritual toll of this, which I think has yet to be fully understood. And at the same time, like, I agree too that part of what this shows so clearly is, I know that in passing through school, like we talked about, like how much is Biden in control, how much are people like Blinken in control, like the visible faces of the government versus the deep state versus, you know, the national security state. Is it possible to really place blame on any particular individual? But I think it is true. Biden and Blinken and all these people who don't even deserve to be, like, I don't know. I feel like revoke your right to be called a human being almost. Like they are guilty for this. Like they are like, and they should be charged with war crimes.
Yeah.
If there is any semblance of international law at all, if international law means anything. And I think it's not like, I feel like there is that narrative of like, oh, Netanyahu was just manipulating Biden. But I think it's like, I feel like it's actually, what I think is true is that Biden, whatever he said, wanted this to happen and was on board with all this happening. And like, yeah, like these figures like Blinken, Jake Sullivan, all the spokespeople for the State Department who have been rightfully called out as apologists for genocide and apologists for continuing this genocidal war. Like, I think they know, like, it's a, yeah, also there's like that interview with Biden, and I forget which outlet it was, but he was like, hey, like Netanyahu, like, why are you carpet bombing civilians? And then Netanyahu was like, well, you guys did it in Germany during World War II, and you guys dropped the atomic bomb. So it's like Biden and like his whole, like this entire state apparatus, like they, it's not like they didn't know, like they did know. And you choose, like, this is where it's like actually like people do, like the choices that those individual politicians make, at least the visible ones that we can see in the government, like you are guilty for that. And humanity should hold you guilty for that. And I don't know, I just feel like the amount of anger, I feel like many of us, like rightfully so also for like the past year, especially against like the Biden administration, like is vindicated. And like I'm actually not sure. I guess Trump's relationship to Zionism, because I feel like he flip-flops a lot. And I don't know if, like, for instance, like Trump made like some kind of secret deal with Netanyahu. I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of unknowns. And like, let's say if the Netanyahu government goes back on the deal, let's say like several weeks from now, and basically tries to restart the war, we don't know what Trump will do. And like, there is a lot of uncertainty. But yeah, I agree that at the same time, like, especially knowing that a significant part of the voting population that didn't vote for Biden or didn't vote for Harris in this election and either sat out the vote or voted for Trump or voted third party was because of the Gaza genocide. I think we're vindicated. I think the American people are vindicated. And at the same time, I feel like there's so many, not just unknowns in terms of what will immediately happen, but also like what impact this has had on humanity. I feel like that's the part which I'm the most like concerned about, I guess, because you can't kill all those children with the world watching and not expect it to have some kind of impact and not expect like people around the world to actually remember that. I don't know, I feel like I'm just like saying things at this point, but I feel like, yeah, at least for me, a lot of the reaction was like, oh, like it was that simple this whole time. Like it was actually that simple this whole time, even if all the details aren't possibilities still uncertain. Like, yeah, like you guys argue, like Netanyahu, the entire Israeli government, the US government, like all of you are guilty.
Right.
Yeah.
And like I think that's something that the American people can't forget. But yeah.
Amongst the older people in the West Bank and Jerusalem, I think Edward Said would talk about his father and how they would drive to the Mediterranean. And I think it's a real disappointment for the people outside in Gaza that they can't go to Jerusalem, and the fact that the people in Jerusalem can't go visit the Mediterranean Sea. And I think it's a very simple thing. Imagine that we couldn't go to New Jersey, we couldn't go to the beach in New Jersey. And there was a history of our people, going to the beach. And it's just ridiculous that the slogan, from the river to the sea, was taken to mean by the mainstream that, this means kill Jews or push Jews in the sea.
Right.
And I think at this being in solidarity with Palestine for so long, I'm just not going to tolerate listening to people tell me that Israel's a democracy, but I'm not going to get, wound up in trying to convince them, like I did in my immature, young man days. Like I have to spit facts at you. I've done so much Chomsky. You're totally wrong. I'm just gonna have to laugh in this person's face that they can do the mental gymnastics that it's okay for Israel to be a theocracy, but it's not okay for Saudi Arabia to be a theocracy, or we can't criticize Israel because that's criticism of Judaism.
Right.
But that's the legal push. I mean, in American states, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement is illegal, which needs to be. It's a simple matter. Just go and challenge it in a court. You can't make it illegal a boycott. And for the IHRA, I believe it's called, definition of anti-Semitism that equates Zionism with anti-Semitism, and that's the force that took Jeremy Corbyn down. But these forces, the Zionist forces, pro-Zionist lobby, are still active in American society, and I guess tomorrow TikTok will be banned,
Yeah.
and it's largely because of Palestine. Which reminds me, just a quick aside, my coworker was telling me that sort of Elvis and the Beatles, that was the first period of time in music when young people listen to different music than their parents, and that trend there's always been older music, and then there's been youth music. And before, recent history, music was something that was collective. Everybody would listen to it. There was no distinction between youth music. But there's really been and where I want to end with is there's really been an attack on children and youth culture, and you can see that in the music, and you can see we talk about that all the time in the culture with Hollywood, and with banning TikTok because its age was so young, even though they were doing everything that all the other Western companies were doing. The user base was so young. There has to be a clampdown. You can see it in Philadelphia with all the flash mobs and the car meetups that there's really nowhere for young people to go. Probably not going to get married. They're probably not going to have children. And that was even more extreme in Gaza, where the Israeli state was, maiming children, jailing children. It leaves people with a pessimistic, hopeless outlook. We talked about it when we said, there is no sky, and Honorable Minister Farrakhan, when he did his Savior's Day speech, he highlighted two books. One was about the Israeli military lab, how Israel uses Gaza as a weapons testing space for futuristic weapons, and then exports them. And then the other was We Charge Genocide. But I think William Patterson. And I think the task moving forward is take everything that we've learned and how the Gaza situation has made things so clear, and to really fight back against these anti-human, anti-child forces in our own society. Because as Mr. Farrakhan was pointing out, that this genocide will bring violence. It's a dialectical relationship. Violence begets violence. You can't express all this violence outside your borders and not expect what some people call blowback.
Well, I wanted to say one more thing, which I kind of forgot about, which is that I know that there is a certain line of reasoning, at least out in the podcast world and in the geoanalytical space, where people are very skeptical of this deal, and they say that there might be some backroom dealing going on under the table, agreements between Trump and Netanyahu, and we shouldn't be too hopeful about this. And I will admit I don't know what's going to happen, and as we've all said, we don't know what's going to happen. Cautious optimism is what I'm going for. However, in the last 15 months, a ceasefire has not been reached. If this was a deceitful agreement, I would expect the Democratic Party to do it first. I would expect Biden and Harris and Antony Blinken and all of these people who are the most corrupt, deceitful people in this country to already have done this kind of backroom dealing, already have been at the forefront of any such underhanded thing where they make it seem like there's a ceasefire and they don't, and eventually they break that argument and support them anyway. But instead what they did was this large period of time where it's just shameful, because they probably think that the American people are stupid. But there was this large period of time where all of the articles that were coming out were saying that, oh, Biden is very mad at Netanyahu. He's raging, like he wants a ceasefire deal now. Like that was everywhere in the New York Times, and like very unhappy with Netanyahu trying to get a ceasefire on the table. But it's Netanyahu is not being. He's being very adamant, but the shelling continued, right? That never stopped, and we never had a date to look forward to. We never thought that 19th January it's going to stop. We never had that situation before. And the other thing is that Israel is also collapsing. Israel is also collapsing. They are probably, I think that we sent them 25 billion for killing women and children, but they have spent 70 billion of their own money funding this war. So they are also in a state where their economy is collapsing. The EU can't send them any aid because the EU is also collapsing. And there are people who are leaving Israel. There are people who don't want to be here. And the reasons for those are varied and myriad, but this does not seem like a decision that was made because because it would serve something good for Netanyahu himself. I think that this was a decision that he was backed into a corner and forced to make.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Very nicely done. I first of all, the information that I've gotten in terms of the three parts of the deal and what this means from the electronic intifada, I think you listened to that, especially Ali Abu
Lima.
Yeah, Abu Lima, and one of the other people there, also from Alexander Mercurius, and in a longer interview where John Mearsheimer says, they all say pretty much the same thing. This was a strategic defeat for Israel, one from which it cannot and will not recover. I consider it also, although they didn't actually put it this way, this is a strategic defeat for Zionism, which raises the question of how will world Jewry go forward. That is religious Jews, non-religious Jews, ethnic Jews, secular Jews. And you have to consider that there are only 16 million Jews in the whole world. So why should such a small part of humanity have the authority or the right to carry out a genocide and bring humanity close to an all-out war in Western Asia? That has to be considered. The American people will have to rethink and think again about all of this money we're sending to Israel, but the Israeli people themselves will have to decide whether this form of state, a quote, Jewish state, serves the interests of world Jewry, which then raises the question, will the Jewish state collapse? The thing that makes this, well, first of all, even though this arrangement, this deal had been worked out maybe 6 months ago by Yahya Sinwar leading the Hamas. They had worked it out. But Biden and Blinken and his administration never intended to have a ceasefire. Never intended. If they intended to have a ceasefire, not voted against all of these UN Security Council resolutions. And I agree, everybody said this. There's a moral price to be paid for this. Humanity, just because there's a ceasefire, we can't look the other way. No. The state of Israel is a criminal state, a Nazi regime, but the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, and to a lesser extent on the West Bank, and maybe not to a lesser degree in southern Lebanon, Hezbollah, and of course the heroic Houthis. But again, I was saying to Nuri, a lot of praise has to go to the students, and of course Nuri's role. Congratulations. That was a really magnificent demonstration of how the US people are a geostrategic force in the world. And of course, the election was further evidence, the abandoned Biden movement, which shook the foundations of the Democratic Party and its coalition, the 100 Democratic members of the House of Representatives who refused to attend Netanyahu's speech, where he got 87 or 85 standing ovations by a bunch of garbage pieces of shit that parade as human beings. But all of this conspired, but the great Palestinian people, looking at that genocide that they went through and to come out of it with a military victory and unbowed and undefeated and prepared to fight on. This is something that we all have to study. What is the spirit of the people? What are people capable of? What are the American people capable of? What is humanity capable of when there is a great cause? And it was all of this. And I think it says for us, there is a future, there is a sky. And we can teach this, and I think as a Saturday Free School going forward, we must teach the lessons of this. Help students, help children to understand this victory. Now it's a three-phase thing, and every one of the phases indicates, and I don't have the text, I don't think anybody does, but what we know at this time, every phase of the three phases indicates Israel defeat. They lost. The vaunted IDF, Israel Defense Forces, or some say the ITF, the Israel Terrorist Forces, or as another person said, the diapers army. But anyway, that's another question. But they were on the ground. All they had were their bombs and drones. And I agree, they can never be, well, forgiven, yes, but they have to pay a price. Maybe the price will be the disintegration of the Israeli state. That state cannot continue to exist. I think in Free School we had said this a lot of times. But I just want to say one last thing. See, this also gets to the heart of American politics and the hypocrisy of the anti-Trump movement,
right,
and of the left. Come on. Like, they sabotaged the march at the Democratic National Convention. They sabotaged it. How could you have hundreds of thousands or 100,000 or something like that marching successfully on Washington, and all of this civil disobedience, the student encampments, and then when it came to the Democratic Convention with Biden and Harris and the whole cabal that is responsible for funding this genocide would be there,
Right.
you can only get 10,000. Sabotage. I have an idea who did it. I know some of them by name, and I prefer not to call them out at this point unless they get a little beside themselves, then I will. But they sabotaged that because they wanted to protect Harris and Biden and the genocide, and they used the claim that Trump would even be worse because he's closer to Netanyahu. All of that has fallen apart. Now, Trump has some blame to take because he runs off at the mouth too much.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying? And the things that he said, I remember Jerry, after he put his article that Harris had to be defeated, then Trump comes out talking about he's going to run all of the students from other countries who are on student visas who participated in the encampments out of the country. He should just keep his mouth shut. But to his credit, he did what no one expected, beginning with his posting of that Jeffrey Sachs lecture, where he not only called Netanyahu an SOB using the words themselves, but it was Jeffrey Sachs railing against Netanyahu's wanting to go to war with Iran. And Trump put that up on his social media, a gesture which we were not clear what it suggested at that time, but it suggested at least a separation from Netanyahu. And the claim that Trump and Netanyahu were like that, and that Netanyahu continued the war in Gaza to make it difficult for Paris to win. You remember all of these narratives? All of them turn out to be untrue. That Trump sent a man over there, and as I think Jerry, or maybe you said it, Sean, too, who was not a politician, not a diplomat, but trusted by Trump. Not Rubio, not the national security advisor, not any of these blowhards who have, this Hegseth, there's a bunch of dumb white people in America. This is not a country of intelligent people, parenthetically. In some ways, it is a justification for Trump's mode of governance. It's what they call, Bonapartism, after Napoleon Bonaparte. That I am the state and the state is me. This all is going to come through me. None of y'all got nothing to say. I'm running it. Because he realizes how dumb these people are. Well, I think just, again, parenthetically, the Philadelphia Blackness leadership class in the stadium. Issue, you got a lot of dumb black people. I mean, really dumb. But anyway, but that's just, I mean, maybe that's a requirement to be a part of the ruling classes.
You gotta follow.
You got to be dumb. But so he sent his own trusted emissary over there. And I know you said this, I just underlined what you said, Shantu.
It was good.
And so Netanyahu, to delay the meeting, said it's Shabbat.
Oh my God. Now you told me this story, but keep going.
Okay. It's Shabbat. And I'm saying it in more ghetto way. Shabbat. It's really Shabbat. But, and so the man said, look, get your behind in your office. You don't celebrate that. You a non-religious Jew. Stop perpetrating. I want you in your office right now. And lay down the law. Whether you do it or not, Trump is going to do it. And if you don't do it, because Trump had already said hell would break loose, not only for the Palestinians, but for Israel. He was prepared to do what Biden and Blinken and Harris would not do all of these months while a genocide was going on, pull back the military support. And that was the threat. And once that was, because there had to be a reason for Netanyahu to concede. Just couldn't be Trump saying, you better do it because I said. Trump was literally saying, if you don't do it, I will make sure that we cut you off financially and militarily. And if you cannot, if you don't have the backing of the United States, which is the principal culprit, as bad as the Israelis are, and they are, the state of Israel must be collapsed. It cannot exist. It is a criminal regime. But the United States is the major player. Without the United States, there is no Israel. And Trump threatened to cut off the flow of money and arms to them. But Trump was not acting without the political backing of the American people. Trump didn't make Trump, the people made Trump, and the people can unmake Trump. And I think Trump has enough wisdom and understanding to know that his situation is fragile, that he has the whole ruling elite against him, the deep state. The knives are out. He could be assassinated at any moment. But he knows now that the polls showed that the majority of American people were against this. And critical parts of his coalition are against it. So I think this is a great victory. Going forward, people are saying, I know I heard this cat, Wilkerson, what's his first name?
Lawrence?
Yeah, Lawrence Wilkerson. Another I mean, what is this? I guess their moment of fame. But he was Colin Powell's chief of staff, when Colin Powell was Secretary of State. And so he makes the claim it's not going to work. And the only answer to the Palestinian-Israeli situation is all-out war in the Middle East. Settle it for good. Questions like this are only settled through all-out war. Well, that's easy for you to say, hometown. You over here.
Right.
But at any rate, that's his claim. It's not going to hold. I think it will hold. One, because once an army negotiates a ceasefire and a withdrawal, first of all, they are going to, in this first phase, the military has to be will be situated in certain confined areas. The Palestinian people who have been driven to the south will be allowed to come back to their homes in the north, whatever their homes are. 600 or more truckloads of relief will come in to Gaza. A day, that the Israeli military will withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Gaza and Egypt. And once they withdraw, then the humanitarian aid will come in. Electricity and water and other things will be restored. This was a strategic defeat, perhaps the first of this magnitude. And Hamas and the Qassam brigades and other military forces were getting stronger in Gaza. They were getting literally stronger in spite of the genocide. This is something I can't even begin to imagine how this was happening. While on the other side, the Israeli army was getting weaker. You know, everybody's having a nervous breakdown now. You know, not because you killed a child, but because you might die.
Right.
You know, that's my only concern. And then, of course, the internal domestic politics of Israel. The far right, what are their names?
National Zionist Party, I think one
Yeah,
was.
but what are the names of the ministers?
Oh, yeah, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir.
Yeah, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. I don't see how they can stay in Netanyahu's government. They have to leave the government. So if they go into opposition, and we know that the party of Ben-Gvir was involved in the assassination of the prime minister who negotiated the first settlement. What's his name? What was the prime minister, the Israeli prime minister who Sharon, no, not Sharon. I forget, that negotiated the first peace agreement with the PLO and Yasser Arafat, and they assassinated him. That was an internal hit job by the far right and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir's party. So the policy of assassination,
Menachem Begin.
Begin, the policy of assassination could come home, that the Israeli people are deeply divided. So even if they wanted to go back into Gaza and resume the war, they just don't have it. And the only way they could wage a war against Iran was with the backing of the United States, because it would have to be an air, naval, missile, drone war, which, and of course, I'm talking too much. Then, to add insult to injury from their point of view, the president of Iran just went,
Met with Putin,
just went to Russia, met with Putin, and signed a strategic agreement. The Russia-Iran strategic agreement. All of the details of this, we don't know. And we shouldn't know. If we knew it all, it would not be of the magnitude that I think it is, because they're secret agreements, such as military cooperation, Russia providing Iran with the best and most up-to-date air defense systems, along with economic alliance to offset the impact of American sanctions. Okay. And then, of course, you know, we could just go into all. I guess what I want to say is, in terms of American politics, this whole left anti-Trump movement, they should get off the stage of history, get out of the way, leave the people alone, and let a genuine dialogue about the future of the country and the future of war and peace take place. They are discredited. And, we're always talking about them here. I mean, frankly, it is just, it boggles my mind how people who do know better, who know more, how they can be such frauds and perpetrators. This anti-Trump thing, this going along with the ruling class, that he will be the second coming of Adolf Hitler. Remember that our democracy was in peril and all of that. Well, the greatest threat to our democracy is war. If you promote war, you can't promote democracy at the same time. And so I really do. I think this is creating a real more positive situation. It says, and here I'm a little more cautious, but not that cautious, that Trump will be a president who will retreat from war. His proposal for a trilateral summit between Putin, Xi Jinping, and Trump. That's earth-shaking. Once he pulled the plug on Netanyahu, it has to be seen as pulling the plug on war with Iran. It's all a part of a single whole. And I think, we'll talk about this later. It makes the conditions for us to do our work, our political education, more positive. And I think everybody in the free school should be congratulated that we never fell into the anti-Trump movement. We fought them tooth and nail for at least a year and a half. And don't forget, they sent out to 2 places where we were having reading groups, emails saying that we are supporters of Trump and we should not be allowed to have Baldwin reading groups in the library or wherever. But that's all I need to say.
It was Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated.
Rabin, that's right.
But Begin?
I don't know how I got Begin in there.
He signed the peace agreement.
He
with
signed the
Egypt.
peace agreement.
And he died peacefully.
Yeah, but Rabin was the one, and the far right in Israel are responsible for assassinating him. And some people even suggest Netanyahu may have been involved in it, or could have known about it.
Can I just have like a few small things that I think I feel like there's people who look at the future and see a world in which the fate of nations and the fate of peoples is essentially decided by amoral, simply pragmatic,
Yes.
Realist, quote unquote, realist.
That's John
considerations.
Hirschheimer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you could actually say that maybe Trump, sometimes he talks like a realist, and he's kind of recruiting, he's recruiting like realists, like, or quote unquote realists, like Aldrich Colby into like his administration and all that. But I think part of what, and I feel like we've said this before, but part of what this past year and a half in Gaza has shown is that the future is decided by and belongs to, in large part, humanity, which is a moral thing. I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to say that, like, when we think about the kind of political geostrategic calculus of whether it's American politics or world politics, all that stuff, I think this question of the morality of the people has to be considered as not an externality or not as simply something which is on the surface, but as actually part of what constitutes
Absolutely.
historical forces, the forces that also make history.
Mhm.
And I think this has been shown by the Palestinian people, by the people of Yemen,
Mhm.
by the entire resistance, and also by the American people as well. And I think Trump, in his own ways, has to respond to that. And he can respond in also like this kind of like schizophrenic way that he does. But I think this is, I feel like when we talk about, yeah, like the arc of the universe and all that stuff, you know, also bringing up King, I think this is, I don't know, I just feel like when we look at the future, I don't think it's correct to say that we're entering an age of mere like great power competition or mere kind of realism or mere only realpolitik. Like that is still part of it, but I think if we're talking about, you know, the painful but actual transition to an age of humanity, this is also an age of morality as well. And I don't think that that should be taken for granted. And it should actually, in the way that I think it's also, this century is bearing the fruits of what was started in the 20th century, especially with the Black freedom movement and the world anti-colonial struggle, in which, yeah, I don't know, I just feel like I'm saying this over and over, but yeah, the future is decided by not just considerations of like what is practical, but also what is moral. And I think the Palestinian people have proven this. And I think the other thing too is, like, I feel like we've already said this a lot, but Gaza has been a generation defining moment,
I agree.
not just for the, like
Yes.
American youth, but for youth around the world.
Mhm.
And I think in part, what has been shattered is specifically, like you said, the myth of the invincibility of the Israeli forces and of the Israeli government and of the Israeli military forces. But that myth of the invincibility of Israel is also the myth of the invincibility of the West and of the US government as well, the US ruling class. And I think it's easy to look at the genocide and say, oh, this merely proves how invincible, let's say, like the West is. But actually, I think in a painful way, the genocide in Gaza actually reveals the weakness of the Western ruling class, because they can only resort to brute violence in response to the resistance of the people. And like you said, Hamas has grown stronger and the IDF has grown weaker, ironically. And I think obviously like the other thing too is that I think especially for our like this generation of like 20 something, 30 something, I guess anyone who's like maybe under 50 or whatever, like, yeah, I think part of what has also been shattered is, I know that this is easy to say, but it is true, is the myth of American democracy as it is portrayed by the US ruling elite. And, you know, Neri wrote the essay in the past issue of Avant-Garde, of, you know, like kind of quoting Baldwin, but like this whole thing of like, we can't go back, like we can't turn back. And I think that this is true for especially this generation of young Americans. And I think exactly like you said, aside from all the rhetoric which is put out by the media, like truly, I think what like this generation is realizing and responding to and waking up to in a visceral way and an immediate and direct way, as opposed to just being told this by, you know, like past generations, by history, is like, yeah, like you can say whatever you want, but the most direct way that like you show, I guess, the contradiction of democracy is war, and is a government that is going to wage war regardless of what the people think or what the people want. And this is the most flagrant violation of the entire claim of American democracy. And I think that obviously then puts the question to the people, then, okay, what kind of democracy do we want? And I think all these questions have been put on the table going forward.
Can I say one thing, Jerry? Just, I mean, I hope, you know, I'm just so happy for you all, for your generation. This is reminiscent of 1975 with the US military fleeing Saigon and South Vietnam like defeated dogs. they don't negotiate because there was just years of Paris negotiations between the U.S. government and the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam. They never intended a negotiated settlement, just like with this. It wasn't drawn out as long. But this victory is for you all, of which your generation is a part of it. I mean, really, and the ruling class will never tell you, but you all are part of this, and it is in part your victory. And I think I've just congratulations, and I'm happy for you.
Well, because I think part of what has been almost like jarring about it, which I think many people struggle to actually make sense of, is like history is real, and you have a role in history, whether you recognize it or not, and you have also a responsibility in that sense. And I guess the last thing that came to mind too was that video that Trump shared of Jeffrey Sachs. That wasn't just Jeffrey Sachs making a speech. That was a Jeffrey Sachs interview with Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
And
Is that where that was
yeah,
from?
that was a clip from Sachs' interview.
I thought it was over at Cambridge. He was giving a lecture or something.
At least the one that I saw that Trump had shared was from like Sachs explaining the origins of like the neoconservative movement in the 2000s and all that. But I think this is also to like the larger point about like the quote unquote American left. I think we've said this before many times, but all of these like kind of categories that people try to use to explain the nature of American politics and the future of America are inadequate because it's like, yeah, like this whole like you can use whatever word like labels you want to use for it, but it's like, yeah, like this phenomenon of like whatever you think of Tucker Carlson, like there's something happening amongst the American people that almost nobody has been able to actually really describe in an accurate way. And I think we're trying to, I think there's all of the stuff happening in America and in the hearts of people and in the minds of people, which is totally not captured at all by the media. Not that the media would even want to try to understand or portray it truthfully, but like I don't know. That's part of what's exciting, but also what is I think makes me anxious, I guess, because there's so many unknowns.
Yeah.
But I think the actual calculus of like what will sway the future, even in the United States, like that is there's so much that I think has to actually be better understood, and which all of the labels that people use are totally inaccurate and totally inadequate for this time. Yeah.
Can I? Well, I wanted to add. I was actually thinking about what you just said, Doc, and that was very moving to say that this, this victory of the Palestinian people is also a victory of like basically youth all over the world. But I was thinking of, like how the nature of the peace movement that, that is coming to being today, how do we assess that, like compared to like precisely that time, like precisely the Vietnam War, but also South Africa, because the thing I wanted to ask is, are we at a time where because the liberalism as a moral philosophy has sort of come around its entire stage. I mean, it's come around its entire arc, such that the peace movement that's beginning to shape today, or even the way that the ceasefire was achieved, and sort of the success was the fact that okay, this was one president who could compel a genocidal regime to do this, that, but as opposed to like as opposed to like a moral standing, which I was talking about, like a new stage where a new stage of moral striving. But I think it looks a little different from what like in the peace movement or the moral striving looked for.
Yes, it does. It's different. It is different, and I think the moral struggle is part and parcel of the ideological struggle. Morality is not a passive abstraction. It is an active, in the King sense, of resistance. Without a high moral consciousness, you cannot conduct or sustain resistance. I think because just my own looking at the quality of these demonstrations and the quickness of their being assembled, this resistance of the campuses, 100 campuses, we never had that back in the days. Yeah, we had Columbia, we had other universities, but not 100 of them. And so severe that the Zionists, the billionaire Zionists, brought down the presidents of several universities because they did not, quote, respond properly. This was on a higher ideological level. But the other thing is, there were not American troops fighting. The campus movement back in the 60s against the war in Vietnam was because of an anti-draft resistance. And students did not want to be drafted to go to war. So that was it. But there were no troops this time. This was a proxy war, And so I think the peace and moral sentiment is deeper. The other thing is, Trump is a phenomenon, a political phenomenon. And I would say, hey, Jared, this is part of getting our heads around or our hands around the political moment in which we're living. Because, I'll put it this way. Trump is known to do the unexpected, like his trip to meet with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, to go to the dividing line. His other things, but then it was sabotaged by his national security, by Mike Pompeo, all of those bombs, And the fact that he is not beholden to the Republican Party. Everybody gets this wrong. The Republicans are beholden to him. It's quite it's mind-blowing. I'll talk about what I talk, but I think if this situation is almost totally different than the anti-war movement and the end of the war in Vietnam. The fact that the proxy, now you could say South Vietnam's army was a proxy for the United States, but the United States was there too. And when the US left, the South Vietnamese army collapsed. The South Vietnamese state collapsed. But the South Vietnamese army never claimed to be one of the most powerful armies in the world. It never had an air force with 2,000-pound bombs. It never carried out a genocide. I don't even remember successive votes in the UN Security Council where the US vetoed them. It was not on this level because the civilizational implications of this defeat, where obviously Israel is not just an aircraft carrier in Western Asia, the Middle East. It is an integral and organic part of Western civilization. And part of the claim of Zionism is that we are fighting for Western civilization. Genocide is necessary to defend Western civilization, And this goes back to the book Clash of Civilizations. I can't remember all. The author of Samuel P. Huntington. What was the clash? It was Western civilization versus Muslim civilization.
Right.
Okay? So Israel is a civilization state connected to the US civilization state. And it was very difficult to separate the Israeli state from the American state. However, Trump, like in his crude and unexpected way, severed or is severing that relationship, which raises the question, can the state of Israel survive without the United States? And will there be an internal reckoning, political reckoning within Israel among the Jewish people, where they will have to decide, is the Israeli state an instrument of peace and safety, or has it made us more vulnerable, by the way, and more hated by the world? Go ahead, man.
Something I've thought about is for describing sort of the decay of the idea of liberalism being eternal, and what really motivates humanity in for describing morality and the moral arc of the universe. Like I think about that in terms of how like John Mearsheimer would talk about how in a realist way, power is just allocating resources to get more power and control its sphere of influence. And it's very cold. It's very static in a way. Like this is just how we operate. And there doesn't seem like much room to move in there, which as human beings, it's, we move, we are moved. And that's what, when we talk about movements changing the social dynamics of civilizations, those were movements. And how are we motivated? And specifically in the context of this conflict, this Holocaust in Gaza, something that I reckon with myself is like both how I was moved away, not that I was ever close to Zionism, but just to see how people in Israel filmed themselves acting, both making fun of people for starving or not having water, not having electricity, or dressing up in blackface and doing a dance. Just overtly racist and revolting expressions. Understandably, people would recoil from that, as well as the stuff I've seen from Israeli military filming their crimes and trying to gloat about it. I mean, honestly, my friend Henry here, I was reading him James Baldwin's poem, Staggeringly Wondrous. And there's a certain part of it, I might not be getting it exactly correct, but he was describing the ideology of Western civilization, this manifest destiny, what he called a hymn to madness. And then he was also thinking about psychologically what's going through the mind of someone in this state of like basically an unadmitted terror of the wrath of God. Like when I see an Israeli soldier with sort of these bloodshot eyes kind of gloating about how he's got a children's soccer trophy and how he's the real winner now, in this like cartoonishly evil way, I'm thinking like deep down he recognized how horrible what he's doing. And the only way he can try to justify in his mind is to flip it completely around and say, no, this is great, and I'll film myself in this way. In a certain way, like showing everyone how guilty I am. As if it's the last part of my humanity I'm holding on to.
This is interesting. Can I just ask a question? Because that's this psychology of a genocide. Because it's not just the government, it's each and every person. So I was going to ask this question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Hold on, I forgot the way the world framed the Nazis who carried out the genocide against the Jews is that they knew what they were doing. They had become so immoral that they didn't care any longer, and that they felt that they were fulfilling a higher mandate.
Sure.
Because part of Zionism, which is not a religious movement, not a Jewish religious movement, political movement, but they take up this claim of the Jews are chosen people, and therefore have a right to revenge history. in this case, not against the Germans, but against Palestinians. But that's, I was going to ask,
So that's
do they,
that's
do they know what they are doing? Do they,
that's a good question. I feel like these
I'm sorry to
excuses-
ask so long.
No, that's fine. Are like justifications to themselves, reassuring themselves, like Baldwin says, these reassuring noises that they're still human and they're doing the right thing. Everyone around their bubble agrees. You know, I still like this idea, this unadmitted terror of the wrath of God. There's something underneath the surface that's not really being inspected, because you know, when you a human being acting in any particular culture sees a kid fall on the ground, will feel compelled somehow internally to do something about it. And no matter how much propaganda or brainwashing you can try to get someone to feel other than that, there's something deeper in us as a species. I think that you can try to bludgeon, you can try to coerce, but ultimately it's, at the end of the day, like a lot of this stuff that Israelis are trying to show as a defense is pushing people away. And on the other side of that, you have, some of the most unbelievable expressions of humanity among the children of God. Like, to hear them speak in so humble and loving and optimistic ways, they've clearly experienced something that I could not even imagine. Is again, it's like, I'm gravitated towards that. How do I live like that? How do I follow that example? People who have literally seemingly nothing, right? So that to me is sort of the dynamic we're talking about, is when these certain ideas that have been constructed around us that had some grain of truth, that we talk about the American tradition and its revolutionary history and all this. But once that edifice becomes static, once we start to think that human beings are just this, and this is all it will ever be, well, people are going to keep moving, right? The imagination can't be held back. And that's another thing I was thinking about. I was watching a podcast with Pepe Escobar, and the person he was talking to was describing how philosophers describe the collapse of nations as which when the artist can no longer actually create in it. The imagination is trapped in nostalgia. Of course, they're bringing up all how Hollywood can only make Marvel movies or Rocky or Star Wars. But the imagination of people can't stop. As people, our imagination, we need to be able to think of ways to live, to survive. It's a necessity. And if the edifice doesn't fit, if they can't just ban a social media platform and then we'll bring our imagination back to when we believed Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah, but the Israeli state must be dismantled. The Jewish people must be denazified. Zionism must be declared a genocidal political position in the same way that Nazism has been, that the Palestinian people must be a part of the re-education of the Israeli Jews. Left to their own, they will never do it. Too arrogant.
Right.
Too arrogant, too much blood on their hands. And they celebrated. They celebrated raping people. I mean, it's just, sometimes people cross over into somewhere that is so anti-human that to bring them back will require so much. They can't do it on their own. World Jewelry cannot do it on its own. And, sometimes the people become too arrogant. And, let me just say this, if you don't mind, because, the question, what side are you on? And for the sake of World Jewelry, we have to confront them with the truth. Jews, because they're not going to be truthful on their own.
Right.
I don't see it. And I think, a whole people, not a big people, but a whole people, especially the American and British and Israeli parts of them, have been so morally debased, so without humanity. There's no humanity there. One person, yeah, okay. But the group, they have to be the state of Israel, the enabling mechanism of this genocide has to be dismantled. There have to be international courts, criminal courts for these people. And the mass of Israelis and Jews in the United States as well have to be confronted with these crimes that you celebrated,
That's right.
you know? And glory to the Jews that stood against it. You know, Jewish Voices for Peace, not my name, the students and all of that. But the great mass, the university professors, the billionaires, the Facebook and so on owners, we know who they are. Their names betray them. You dig where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
I think we got to draw. It can't be just. There must be something in each of them that reviles against doing what they were doing and yada yada yada. Maybe, and if it's there, it is only going to be made manifest as a result of them being humble enough to have that Palestinian child that you're talking about re-educate this people. They've gotten too arrogant. Too arrogant. They're too arrogant. And power has corrupted them. We saw it over these last months. Power corrupted them. And the corruption that is the Zionist is in large measure responsible for Kamala Harris being defeated. That's where, but I'm sorry to cut you off.
And the corruption also led them to be in a certain way powerless.
In a certain way, what?
Well, this ability that the Jewish state and the Jewish people have lived on, basically this like, I can do anything and no one can do anything to me, is that's an unstable position to be in.
Well, but it worked for so long. It worked for so long.
Yeah.
And it corrupted them. It corrupted them. You know, let's face it. A people, a nation, which is morally corrupt, what they did in Gaza, 2,000-pound bomb dropped on a tent city, and you're gonna laugh about it? A Palestinian whose head was severed from their body, you're gonna use it like a soccer ball? Ha, ha, ha. That is something collective. You know, that's all I'm saying. And so humanity must excise that from the body of humanity. And it can only re-enter on terms of humanity, not on their terms. Y'all don't have nothing to say. Shut up. Shut up. And that's what they're gonna have in this country. I know Jews that went silent on social media when this genocide started. They had so much to say about everything. Then when this happened, I ain't heard a word. I'm trying to feel, hey dog, where you at? I ain't feeling you. Corruption. Corrupted. And so they're gonna have to shut up. The way they point their fingers at other, especially African Americans, I'm gonna tell you that. The way they have arrogantly manipulated groups and so on, it's over. Now you have to shut up. You want to take my job? Go ahead and take it, dog. Because in the end, you are going, we now know it. We now see them. This is not, yeah, okay, I'll shut up. I'll shut up, Emil. Forgive me, man. I'm sorry.
It's the exposure is the exposure. I mean, like, for all the horrible things that happen, it's obviously, no one wants this kind of thing to happen, and we do what we can to try to prevent it and end it and excise it. But it is also positive in a way that people see just what this does to your humanity.
Well, we'll turn it into a positive.
Yeah.
See, it is a negative which dialectically, we, as you say, will use it pedagogically to teach humanity what a crime looks like against people.
And like you said, this is the example we're getting in our generation of Nazi Germany. And this history that we got of Nazi Germany wasn't full. It wasn't the full.
Oh, by the way, let me just say this, but that don't leave all these other Zionists. I'm not talking about Jewish Zionists. I'm talking about non-Jewish Zionists, like a Biden, Genocide Joe, like these Republicans standing up, applauding, and Democrats, but mainly this Netanyahu, and just like this Hegseth, talking about he wants to kill all Palestinians. Really? Is that what you really want to do? Did you mean to say that? Okay, now we got it on record. And when the reckoning comes, your words will be part of it. I think we're at a point where, the Zionists overwhelmed the media, overwhelmed academia, had such powerful positions shaping opinion in politics, and claim to be more. Now you don't have it no more, dog. Now let's talk. Let's talk about, not about Palestine, let's talk about you. You the one I want to talk to. I don't want to talk about an American Jewry, American Zionist, all your synagogues, the one up there on Broad Street, around the corner from me, where you brought IDF people there to support a genocide. No, money, you ain't dictating nothing. And I think that's the way we got to talk. You got to get real with them. They ain't just like we're the victims of the, yeah, you're the victims of that Holocaust, but then you carried out another one. Yeah, a victim that carried out one as bad or even worse. I think it's going to be worse, by the way. That's what I'm saying. I feel like let's talk. Since you was pointing your fingers at everybody and calling everybody anti-Semite, like this bum we got as the governor of Pennsylvania. Everybody's an anti-Semite if you don't go along with a genocide. You know what I'm saying? You ran the students at the University of Pennsylvania off that campus. Let's talk, money. I want to talk to you. If you got the courage and heart to do it. But this is where we are. They collapse. Emil, they collapse. Their world is collapsing. Good. Beautiful. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm sorry.
No. Well, I wanted to return to that point that you mentioned when you were saying to Jeremiah, like, oh, I'm so glad that your generation is able to see something.
Yes.
And then you're comparing it to when the American military exited Vietnam. And I actually wanted to ask if you could flesh out that point a little more, because there's something I'm trying to connect in my head to what we were talking about after with the moral struggle is in lockstep with the ideological struggle. And I say it because Mary, Prabha, and I are also preparing for this semester Lotus, and the genocide has always been on the back of our minds, and how we frame the reading group as a place where like young people can develop into people who see themselves as a part of history. And so that's some of what I feel with,
So I try to think a lot about like what they've seen and what it's done to them. And now that we approach almost a year since the student encampments,
Yes.
I think what has impressed upon us is that the students saw something that's free that they will never forget.
Yes.
And I just wonder, like, how has the calculus changed for the young generation after the ceasefire? And like, you know what I'm saying? It's,
I hear you
I'm trying to work
completely,
something
man.
out. Yeah.
And yours is such a difficult generation to understand. You know, as Lotus has discovered.
Well, I feel like I'm old now because I find them hard to understand.
Babies.
Yeah.
But part of it is the collapse of the American political order, the fact of the immorality of American foreign and domestic policy, the fact that everybody knows the ruling class is lying 24/7. I think your generation is more sensitive to things, you know, like older people, they have like, you know, a lot of, they done been whooped so much and lied to so much, it doesn't even affect them. You all ain't experienced that. And lying is probably one of the greatest crimes that you all see. For people in authority to lie knowingly to you all is like, you know, disgust young people. Disgust them. And because young people, you know, get college students, they're just a year or so outside of their parents' house. Many of them, because they can't get jobs, going to return to their parents' house. But it's just, so they're young, they're tender. And to lie to them repeatedly, and then when they protest the lie, you call the police in on them, everybody ain't going to get it overnight. But the best of your generation will. The question is, will they be taken off into some kind of far left individual act, or will they join with the broad mass of people? You know, the Black movement in particular, that tradition of our country, which is the revolutionary tradition. And if they can see that, and especially I think for young people, and I base this upon myself, it's always an impatience. We became very impatient with King. We became very impatient with this, and not knowing anything, just being dumb, but think we know more than we did. So patience and a set of values. I agree with this thing of values. And if I were to do Lotus, you know, I would start with, you know, a radical revolution of values, what that means. That's all. That's really nice. But I think you all are in a far better position than my generation was after the war in Vietnam. Because the roots of the student movement are not the students alone, but the people. The foundation upon which you all stand. I think a lot of students, at least that's what I saw at Penn. Hey, Nori, remember when you set up the teaching, and the students were so interested in the people beyond the student part. Remember that? That was very revealing for me of the character of the students.
You know, you were talking about Jews. What is accounting for the change? What is accounting for the change in the Jewish field? You remember?
I'm sorry, Dwight, I couldn't.
What is accounting about the Jewish state today? What's accounting for that?
I can't understand. What account for what today?
Accounting for the change.
Oh, the Jewish. Okay.
You remember when they formed in 1948,
right.
The world had empathy for
absolutely.
the Jewish community. And so now today, that has changed.
Yeah.
And what I see in the whole world, the whole idea of a homogeneous state in the world is changing. It's reflected right here in America. We were once black and white. So the world is changing with technology and all of these ideas. And with that change, and as you said, the young people today, via the cell phone, they can actually see the genocide. We couldn't see that. All of that affects the consciousness of how you see the world. It affects your moral view of the world. So I'm saying that in terms of the Jewish state, the Jewish people must change their consciousness, how they relate to the world.
But you see what the problematic is. Can they do it alone?
No, they can't. But
Right.
the forces are making them do it because what they're doing, if you look at, when I was looking at the news, I saw these young kids celebrating. When young kids
Celebrating where?
That the war was over.
But who were they? Palestinians?
Palestinians.
Oh, yes, of course.
And that's dangerous. The reason why, because those Palestinian kids remember, you killed my father, you killed my sister. It's all, and so what they have to do, the Jewish people, if they want peace, they're going to have to change because it's going to be eternal war.
Could I suggest something? Could I suggest something? Because I know, and this is what I think somebody was talking about John Mearsheimer and this geostrategic realism,
Right.
where there is no morality, the moral question never comes up. See, it's not a question of peace for Israel.
Right.
That's not the question. To put it that way is to avoid the real question. The question is peace for humanity. And if Israel is an obstacle to that, if the Jewish people are an obstacle to that, then humanity must not compromise with them. Humanity must find a way to convince them otherwise. This is what, see, I think, if I could just say once, and then you come back and you tell me, look, all of the great religious leaders of the world, the Pope, the head of the Anglican Church, whatever rabbis you can pull out of the gutter to stand up for something, Hindus must join together and say, this cannot happen again anywhere in the world. And then say, this is what I'm saying to Emil, in no uncertain terms, y'all are wrong. Now sit down and shut up. You cannot, see, there ain't no peace for Israel, peace for the Arabs, the Palestinians. No, we beyond that right now. Peace transcends what is good for Israel. There ain't no good for Israel. Israel must be done away with as a state. It has to be. I'm sorry, but go ahead, Dwight. I interrupted you. Forgive me.
Well, the language.
Yes.
Has, when you say Israel, yes. In terms of Israel has to be done away with. When people read that, they think I'm talking about that's what they think.
Well, I don't care what they. Wait a minute. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, go. I'm sorry. See, you tell me about what people. What people?
Well,
you say Jews. Jews will feel that way. Oh, you okay?
What I'm saying, I agree with you.
Right.
About the humanity.
Yes.
Language is very, like you already, the language is very important.
I agree with you.
How another person interprets it. Because when you say, if you say the stability must be disbanded, some Jew out there saying, what does he mean?
Well, beautiful. Then let's talk about it.
But here's what I do agree with. That the state of Israel or any state that is religious must be done away with, and they must live in peace with the Palestinian people with dignity, or treat them like human beings. That must be the case. And all I'm talking about, so I'm not disagreeing with you. Actually, I'm agreeing with you. I'm just talking about how.
I think, you said the
I feel like
language.
saying that like any state that is religious has to be done away with. I think that also absolves specifically Israel, because there are other states which are religious, which are not committing genocides. And it's specifically the state of Israel which is committing the genocide. And the problem is not, I don't think the problem is per se a religious state, but the problem is a state in which, on the one hand, calling itself a democracy, the only quote unquote the only democracy in the Middle East, in which all of the people in that quote unquote democracy are voting for extermination of another people. That's really the problem. And I think it can't be just treated as like, oh, like all of these, any state that's religious has to be done away with. And I think I feel like the larger question is that I feel like this is part of what Baldwin says when he's like, actually, white people to reclaim their humanity need black people much more than black people need white people. And in the same way, it's the Israelis, in order to reclaim their humanity, who need the Palestinians and humanity to reclaim their humanity much more than the Palestinians need the Israelis at this point. And I think it's, and I think I talk where it's like, if an Israeli or a Jewish person feels uncomfortable when you say that the state of Israel has revoked essentially its right to exist, if there's any kind of, whether it's international law, the moral right to exist for a state, whatever you call it, if a Jewish person feels uncomfortable with that, then they should be confronted with that. Like it's not like, I feel like it has reached a state where it's like, because there's also, I feel like you tend, like, there's this, I feel like sometimes you encounter this reaction where it's like Jewish people, even if they say they're like anti-Zionist, their reaction is to be like, oh, but this is almost like an internal thing for Jewish people to figure out. When it's like, no, like you put your business out for the whole world to deal with. And when humanity responds, you can't be angry that humanity is responding to what you yourself as a people have put up on the table for the whole world to see. And so it's like, I don't know exactly if this is responding to what you're saying, but I think it's like, it can't just be this thing of like feeling the need to be sensitive about how like a Jewish person might react. And it's like, no, like they're the ones who have put their business out for the world to see. And you can't blame humanity for responding to that and basically seeing your whole project as legitimate at this point, whether it's a moral right, a legal right, whatever it is. And I think that it's not just that the ball is in the court for Israelis to figure this out internally. Humanity has to confront them with what they have essentially not just done to the Palestinians, but have done to humanity itself. And I think that like you can't compromise on that part, even if it's like the hope is that Israelis and I guess world Jewry can reclaim their humanity. But like they need the Palestinians and they need humanity itself much more than the Palestinians at this point need the Israelis. And at least on that moral level. And I feel like it can't be this whole thing of like, oh, just hitting it as like, oh, like the Israelis versus the Palestinians, and it's this kind of like equal playing field. And because I feel like it's not an equal playing field, at least on the levels of like actual, when we actually talk about what it means to be a human being at a basic level.
I agree with you about the humanity. You talk about the religion state. I think that any state that has promotes a religion is a dangerous state. And I Muslim, Christianity, because anything that you have to have some sort of tolerance ideas in your moral with other people. We all don't do the same thing. That's why I said.
Can I ask you a question, Dwight?
Why I said
Let's talk about how we define religion, because religion means something for people in very different ways.
Exactly.
For example, religion could be the way to establish the moral boundaries of the state. You understand what I'm saying?
Foundation.
People would say that a completely secular state is often a state that where morality is relative. You know, I mean, so I think that is a discussion we must have. But I agree with Jerry. Now we're talking about a genocidal state.
But that's, yeah, I agree with that.
You see what I'm saying?
Not all religious states are genocidal states.
But perhaps we could move on to the discussion of the crisis of the party system,
Yes, please.
which overlaps with this, if no one minds.
Yeah.
Well, this is a discussion we've been having for some weeks now, but I just wanted to quickly go through this because there is so much unclarity about the significance and meaning of the 2024 election, that Trump represents a quote existential threat to democracy and to the liberal tradition and all of that. And it brings into, it must bring into our visionary, into the pure purview of our vision, the question of political parties and the state. First of all, everybody knows that the United States is a two-party system. It should better be defined as a political system that operates on the basis of two coalitions of political forces. So it is there are two electoral parties with many parts to them, which in another situation, let us say Italy, or France, or even Germany, would exist as a multi-party system, where the parties are more politically and ideologically defined. American political parties, be it the Democrats or Republicans, are coalitions of political groups that exist primarily to run for election and to win election, and on the basis of that, to become the governing party. And so, you know, be it a Democrat or Republican administration, it is a governing coalition. Traditionally, the two-party system existed to uphold what they call the vital center, that the parties would compete to win government power, but then after winning, they would both come more or less to the center in order to govern. So even though the Democrats would win traditionally, they would govern alongside Republicans. Does that make sense? In the sense of having, after the election, move to the center. There's a famous poem by William Butler Yeats that in a time like this, it's like reading verses from the Bible sometimes, where he talks, it's called The Second Coming, it's after World War I. And one of the things that he says, the center will not hold. Things fall apart. The collapse of the center means is an indication that things will fall apart. The crisis of the political party system in our country right now is that the center did not hold. The center collapsed. What is so interesting in the 2024 election is that Kamala and Biden and the Democrats they went forward with the proposition that Trump is an extremist and that he does not respect the center of politics. Okay? That he wishes to govern on the basis of his people, his point of view, his extreme illiberal positions. And when they say not liberal, they mean that he does not believe in upholding the center. And he doesn't. And he doesn't. The question becomes, can a nation which has for over 80 years, maybe 100 years, governed on the basis of the vital center be governed if the vital center has collapsed and the president, the top politician in the country, does not respect the center and does not intend to govern on the basis of the center? Can the country be governed? Does everybody see what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
This is, in my opinion, the essence of the crisis. The center has collapsed. Can the ruling elite govern? But beside being mechanisms of governance, the governing of the country, political parties are in one or another way instruments of the state itself. Therefore, the secular state, the law-governed or law-based state, here I wish to underline very strongly the concept of law. This is Dwight's point of the state that governs on the basis of law, the secular state, rather than on the basis of religion or morality, comes into question here. But it can govern, the state can be stabilized, can be consolidated, as long as all of the political parties and political forces agree to come to the center after the electoral disputes, to arrive at a consensus establishing that neither side is an enemy of the state. I wish to underline an enemy of the state and an enemy of the law-based state, the secular state. If, as is the case with Trump, he said if he wins, he will be your retribution, your revenge, and he's going after the state, at least the deep state, which meant that he established himself as an enemy of the state or parts of it, and they treated him as though he were an enemy of the state. An enemy of the state, an enemy of the liberal regime. And he is treated like that up to this point. So if, and I'm repeating myself, if a consensus of all of the political forces or the main political forces in the country is necessary for the country to be governed and for the state to be stabilized, if one side of the political equation has established that the state is the enemy of the people, and I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that that was all in Trump's rhetoric. And hence, and this is just an extrapolation, and hence, those close to 80 million people who voted for him, at least a significant part of them, were saying that the system of governance and the system of state power is not what we want. Right. Take China. Every poll, 85% of the people say the government represents them. Mm-hmm. Come to the United States, 80% of the people say the government don't represent you. Mm-hmm. You know, poll after poll after poll. Country's going in the wrong direction. We have to change the clip. You know, every poll of the people shows a negative view of the government and the state. The brilliance of Trump as a politician, he read the people right. He knew this or intuited it. I don't know how his thought processes operate. That's a study in itself. A unique phenomenon that he felt that the state, if he ran on a proposition that the state was the enemy of the people, that he could win. And he felt that the more that the state indicted him, the better it would be for him. Now, the Democrats, trying to pull their party together, haven't yet had the courage to face this fact. Oh, all we have to do is improve our communication with the working class. Well, that horse is out of the barn, baby. You messed up for about 30 some years, you ain't gonna get the working class back. You know what I'm saying? So stay with your, different siloed groups. Okay. Okay, 2024. And this is why Trump's victory is such a shattering political and moral defeat for the ruling elite, who had more or less assembled in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was not just another political party, but in this election, it was so weaponized that it became the party, as I said, defending liberal democracy, I put quotes, to be read as the rule of the existing ruling class. We have been in power since World War II. We took y'all through the Cold War. By y'all, they mean the people. And we brought communism down. That's their narrative. And therefore, that proves that we, the existing ruling class, are fit to rule because we brought communism down. Okay, I don't want to start laughing and make any of my stupid jokes, but it is such a, so they ran with this thing of the end of history. We won, you lost. We are competent to rule, almost as though it was a mandate of heaven, to use the Chinese, or the Western mandate of God, or the ruling elite of the United States were chosen people. We're smarter than everybody. Check Blinken out as he strode across the globe, as he went up in the Chinese people's face, the foreign minister of China, when he first got in office and tried to step to them. Then people told him, wait a minute, stop the madness. I don't know who you think you, but anyway, but they believe that. They believe this country is indispensable if humanity is to exist. It was a shattering defeat. A shattering defeat, and we cannot underestimate it. It deepened the crisis of governance and of the state. It sharpened the contradiction between the ruling elite and the mass of working people and young people who will never trust again representatives of this regime. That is probably, I know we came out of the war in Vietnam and we would never trust these bums. But then some of us, like the Bill Clintons of the world, were quickly, and the John Kerrys, quickly absorbed into the ruling class, you know? And then most of us kind of faded into oblivion, you know, and went about life, normal American life, and so on. So the Democratic Party, which was the party of the New Deal, civil rights, and women's rights, because they absorbed into their coalition Black folk and even representatives of the civil rights movement itself, like Andrew Young, like John Lewis, and others. The Democratic Coalition, which absorbed into its ranks labor coming out of the New Deal and the labor organizing of the 1930s, and women's rights advocates, especially on questions of reproductive rights. They all fell under the banner of the Democratic Party and the Democratic Coalition. But it never became an anti-war party. And King understood this. There cannot be social progress in the United States as long as the United States is committed to war. This is why, after the assassination of King, the leaders of the civil rights movement, including Coretta Scott King and Ralph Abernathy and C.T. Vivian and Carlton Goodlett and so many others, joined the World Peace Council and the World Peace Movement, recognizing that civil rights could not be consolidated and the substance of civil rights, i.e. economic and social rights, could never be realized as long as the focus of the nation was on war. 2024, a party of war still trying to claim to be the party of Martin Luther King and the party of Black civil rights. It didn't fly. People did not believe you. So the defeat was a defeat of an amoral, morally hypocritical, and lying elite who the masses had seen through, and especially young people and students. But the people saw through them. And their major base of support, the Black community, gradually moved away. They didn't talk a lot about it. They didn't want to be shamed by the likes of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and Al Sharpton, gang of other hypocrites. So they kept quiet. But on election day, they got even. They got even. But then the Republican Party is not the Republican Party. It is a divided institution between the Trump movement, which took it over, and the Republicans, who are trying to regain something through the Senate. This is why they keep talking about senators, this Republican senator, that Republican senator, and so on. They want them to be, and some of them are going to play that game, to be the counter to Trump. But Trump has shown that he can defeat them. He can primary them. And that he controls most of who constitutes the Republican Party, which is the working class now. The majority of working class and lower middle class, and I would presume poor people, are now either Republicans or independents. They have left the Democratic Party. So if there's a Republican senator who who feels he can stand up and become an opposition to Trump. The example of how that will fail is Mitt Romney. Yeah, he's a joke. And so on. So will the Republican Party become the Trump Party, and will what is left of the Republican Party become something different? For example, there were certain anti-Trump movements of Republicans that appeared in 2024 and 2023. One was the Lincoln Project. They were all Republicans, and turns out that they were led by a cat that was stealing money and was a pedophile. So he went down. But still, they tried to hold on. And the remnants of it is still, they got a podcast and so. But what did they say? Just like Joe Scarborough, hey, I'm a small government conservative who abandoned the Republican Party. He said, so what, man? You a footnote now. You don't count. It doesn't make any difference because Trump unleashed forces deep in the working class that joined him against the Republican establishment and ultimately became a force to defeat the party of the state, the Democratic Party. Okay, let me just go quickly. So all parties, dominant parties in any society, whether it's a multi-party, two-party, or one-party regime, are parties of the state. I don't care whether it's the two-party system in the United States, the multi-party system in Germany or Italy, or the one-party state in Cuba or China or North Korea or Vietnam. You see what I'm saying? And even those parties turn out to be coalitions of different points of view and ideologies. We are propagandized to believe that the 90 million members of the Chinese Communist Party all believe the same thing. No, they don't. There is the Xi Jinping people who are the dominant part, but you got still old school Maoists up in there. I'm talking about old school Maoists. If you've never met an old school Maoist, I'll tell you about that later on. There's something to deal with. You have, within the Communist Party of China, you have liberals, people who believe in the liberal bourgeois way of doing things. You have social democrats. China is a complex political environment. The Communist Party is a complex political environment. However, the Communist Party of China is the party of the state. In other words, for the state to be stabilized in their tradition, you need a Communist Party, which is a governing party as well as a party of the state. It is different than the liberal bourgeois arrangement that we have in this country. So if you are deeply into the liberal way of politics, it's hard to understand the culture and dynamics of a place like China. The state, the Chinese state, in fact, comes out of a wholly different a communist party and I think there was a communist party, to form a united communist party. So it was a unique dialectic, but it was their way of resolving the question of the stabilization of the state and of state power, and two, of a system of governance. Now, their system of government, and I think China has kernel of the governing system in Cuba. Then there are other institutions like the parliament, like ministries, and that type of the normal thing. But China is, and if you say China and maybe North Korea, duty to the family is also duty to the state and to society. That's Confucianism, you know. And the influence of Confucianism in Chinese society, even with the introduction of Buddhism. Well, we won't get into all of that, but certainly in North Korea. So it is no big thing to go from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un, a succession of leaders of the state in North Korea from the same family. So you say, oh, that's undemocratic, that's yada, yada, yada. Well, they're not seeking your approval. They have their own moral, philosophical foundations, okay? Vietnam is perhaps different. It's a different values. Okay, let me just end on this. As you are aware, with Bernie Sanders having sold out a whole generation of young people, who look to him to lead a socialist movement, to create a socialist party here. A lot of them went to Marxism, Leninism, and decided that they had to create revolutionary or Marxist Leninist parties. And I feel, and I don't want to wish any harm or wish any bad things on anybody, it's going to fail. It's going to fail tremendously. Because the worldview that guides the party concept that they have does not fit this epoch in history. If the concept of the class conflict and parties based upon class was our inheritance from the 19th century consolidated in the 20th century by the Leninist, what we call the Leninist concept, or Lenin's concept of the party of a new type, a revolutionary party, if that is our inheritance from that period. For us in this epoch, it is the concept and category of humanity. I don't know that I have a lot of time to explain that, but, and that is part of the inheritance of the Black freedom movement, of Baldwin, King, Abernathy, Coretta Scott King, that saw their inheritance in India. Isn't that interesting? And the Gandhi movement and the independence movement in India against British colonialism. And therefore, the idea of a party which would bring consciousness to the masses from outside of the working class. In other words, for the working class to fulfill its historic responsibility. There had to be a revolutionary party that would educate the masses. In every instance, the idea of such a party assumes a population of people who are either in their majority illiterate or not very literate, and have no sense of history, their own or world history. So a revolutionary party, and Fidel was very clear about this when he talked about the July 26 movement, the first and primary responsibility of the Revolutionary Party is to educate the people. Okay? Now, the big question is the level of consciousness of the people. The 19th century, the masses of people were uneducated, illiterate, and inexperienced. The people of the 21st century are light years ahead of that. And of course, technology, social media, but more than anything, the experience of the people. Example, the American people are still learning from their own history, but in particular, the Great Civil Rights. It has impacted them in ways that they do not know. So they are much more conscious than the Russian working class and peasantry were in the 19th and early 20th century. So the question becomes, is a Leninist party indispensable to the revolutionary process in a society like our own? And of course, we would have to study the similarities and differences between, let us say, Russia in 1917, China in 1949 and 1930s, 1940s, Cuba in 1960, Vietnam in the late 40s and early 50s with Ho Chi Minh. What are the similarities between our situation, our people, and those times? They're not the same. So one size doesn't fit all. I'll end here. Therefore, I am of the opinion that what fits our country at this time in history is a all humanity struggle for peace and democracy. So people say, what do you mean humanity? Well, you have to define it. What do you mean democracy? What kind of democracy? What do you mean peace? But the point of it is to unite the maximum number of people to achieve what is achievable and what must be achieved at this moment in history if humanity is to be saved from nuclear war, nuclear annihilation, genocide. And how can there be peace without democracy? Which means the seizure of power by the people. I was saying to somebody this morning that Philadelphia might be a prime starting point to kick the bums out. The people take power given the incompetence of the governing class in the city. But that's what I'll end there. We don't have to talk about it necessarily unless y'all want to.
I mean, I can say something, but while people are collecting their thoughts, because it's always a hard follow, especially when Emily's not here. I think it's helpful to define what you're saying in terms of the different parties of the state and how, or that they are parties of the state. And even what you were saying of Trump, where pre and post election, where historically over the past several decades, no matter how you duke it out, prior to election, afterwards, you have to figure out a path to govern with both. And this is always a debate, which is that who's the president, then who's in Senate, is it, or not the Senate and the House, is it a Republican majority, a Democratic majority? And that's always been confusing for me because essentially, I think for those trying to understand the American state, it also comes off as very inefficient, where you essentially have all of these different, or not all of these two parties that actually have to, when a resolution is passed, then it has to go through the Senate. And then by the time it's out, it's removed from what the people actually are talking about, relevant. And then it was also, and this is just me piecing out things together. But even when you're talking about China, it's interesting because there is this assumption or romanticization of what China is. Assumption that, one, the Chinese people are all brainwashed, right? And therefore, yeah, like brainwashed, not free. And therefore, the Communist Party, like even with these polls, it can't be that they're satisfied with their government. Like this 80%, it's because the Chinese people are afraid to speak or dissent. But in reality, it's very different, where even both the Communist Party of China and then also the people, there are different and opposing views. But at the same time, it works, where we mentioned last week, which is that people's lives have been improving over the past several generations since, like even right now compared to the 90s, compared to the 2000s, so forth. And so I think that was, I guess my point with that is that oftentimes in the left here there's a romanticization of China and that struggle without understanding that there was a certain revolutionary history and certain conditions that allow China to carry out what it has over the past decade or so. Then it becomes a question of, there are all these great revolutions that have happened in history, but is it just a copy and paste for America? And for those who are interested in for America, so from the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, Cuba, is it just that we have to bring Marxism, Leninism to America? And what does that even mean? Where was I going here? Which is that for America, if you are interested in the future of America, you also have to understand what is the history of America and what are the conditions of the people. And oftentimes it's very confusing because America is a new nation. And I didn't realize this until I went to London over the holidays, where they, like in the British Museum, they're continuously emphasizing India, China, these thousands of years of history, and that that is a prerequisite to what happens in the country right now. But something that's different about America is that it doesn't have those thousands of centuries, but what it does have is a revolutionary history, and it does have Black people in this country. And the reason why I even say, I think people are oftentimes confused, which is like, why do we keep talking about Black people? Like, why would we keep talking about Black freedom struggle? And it is that when you look critically at America, like, what is the source of a civilization? And civilization being, and I think we're all also still continuously defining it, which is that what holds a society together based on common assumptions, common values, morals, and the way that I understand it is that in China, there is this thing, which is that this basis of filial piety and the family structure, but that's not the same as America. In China, it's interesting because I've been traveling in China in different regions over the past 2 years, and there is something that, even though I'm uniquely American, I carry some of that from my parents, and I can understand when I go to, I don't know, some like the northwest of China, when my family is from the south of China, that there are certain values of family relations to the state that make people very familiar with one another. But in America, it's not yet formed where, you have your Californians, you have your New York, you have the South. And so when we say king, and this weekend being MLK Day, which is that king is representative of the Black freedom struggle, or the leader of the Black freedom struggle, provides that basis of values and morals for new American people. I think I'll just leave it there. I think that provides some buffer for people to respond. But what was I going to say? I think my last point being is that what you said about what is happening in the world, and also specifically with the collapse of Israel, and also in America, is very interesting because we are living in a great time and an exciting time for those whose eyes are open. And with that comes the possibilities as well of what you're saying, the work that Free School and all who are interested in the future can do to educate the people, to figure things out together. Because, we talk about individuals like Tucker Carlson or Trump or Mercurius, like this kaleidoscope, as you say, and we agree on certain things, but we also don't agree on certain things. But the whole point of it is to figure things out. And the reason why I say this is because you have your Tucker Carlsons, and I mean, even the Candace Owens. And this week I was listening to a podcast that Candace Owens has. It's funny. That girl's funny. And her whole thing is also that the state is corrupt. And that, I mean, another thing that she's big about is what is it, like women like keeping babies? I forget that whole thing. And then she says like, but I'm anti-communist because, you know, we defeated communism. And I was like, there's a lot of this stuff in here. And it reminds me of what Baldwin had said about America, which is that it's like a baby taking its steps and figuring out like, what the heck is this place? And I think forums like the Free School or throughout the year of Baldwin, where we have these different spaces where Americans get to talk to one another and figure out like what will be a society for peace, or, you know, after, like, let's say like war is off the table, then what does that mean for democracy, which is as what does it mean for democracy, and what does it mean in the terms of people working out ideas and people working out what the state will look like. And that does require a level of patience, because it's not going to happen like this year in the way that everything is going to be sorted out. We're going to be communists, we're going to whatever, but actually like figuring out what that means. So I'll just end there.
Yeah, well, you know, yeah, I guess I was taking some time to collect my thoughts, but
I'm sorry, I didn't mention India. And, you know, the state of India, yeah. But
no, but you know, I mean, yeah, I guess this is what we've been thinking about throughout this year in general, but the way you were talking about, you know, how defending democracy is, you know, I mean, it has become the ultimate victory of the ruling elite. I mean, this is the place we're at, where the ends of liberalism is the ends of empire. And I guess we talk about, you know, we have been talking about it in many ways for a while, but I think we are coming, like what you were saying made me think that we are now at a place where, out of this entire history of the establishment of the British and then the US empire, and the declaration that liberalism has been declared as the most advanced system of thought, but then you face the contradiction of liberalism and, you know, slavery and empire, and therefore you invent, you know, white supremacy and all of this. But all of this has brought us to a place where the human being is under extreme attack, in the sense that, you know, the human being is not understood. And, you know, what you were talking about in terms of Trump and even, yeah, this whole formulation of the party of the state and what this represents. I mean, today I think one of the sources of confusion. I mean, the reason why there is so much confusion about the revolutionary process is because the human being is not understood. And I think, you know, this is the I guess this is the challenge, I think, that we face, because I agree with what Alice was saying. There are a lot of people around who are, you know, who do see the crisis of the state, who do see the crisis of like the fact that, you know, we are, even the two-party system is in a place of crisis, and how you know, the US empire is in decline. But I think we are trying to do, we in the Free School are trying to do something unique, you know, which is to figure out our relationship with the human being and our relationship with the people. And I think this is a new stage for the struggle at this point, because we're not simply talking about the crisis of the state, but we're, like, you know, the way you were talking about how, and I guess from the start we've been talking about this today, about how this must be seen as a victory of you know, the Palestinian, but also the American people. And yeah, I just wanted to, like, you know, bring up what you were saying, that this even this question of like what is like the revolutionary process of this country, do we need a Leninist party? And the examples that we have are like examples of parties of communist parties throughout like not just in America but in other parts of the West. And the main thing that shouts out is that they have no idea of where the people are. They have no idea of who the people are. And I think people know when they are, disrespected. And I think, this is I think this is why we are at a unique place, because we are not talking about the education of the people as though we are not a part of them, but to sort of go back to like 100 years back, and to say that okay, the future of this country and what people have to know today is basically to recover the history of 100 years back. This is an ahistorical formulation, and I think we're at a point where that is clearly that's crumbling. And I think the reason is that like the task for us therefore is to have a theory of the new human being. And I think this is why this is also what all of this thinking about liberalism and freedom, this is the reason for it, because we're trying to formulate how do you understand the new human being, how do you understand ourselves. And I mean, this is something I think we all talk about all the time, to even in terms of the year of Baldwin. I mean, it is something to be understood why, what makes all of us, but also like all people of the city to come together to read Baldwin. What are we trying to figure out? It does say something about our strivings, and I think we're trying to. I think to understand that is required of us at this time.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying about Trump is in tandem with what you said about the center not holding.
Yeah,
That there's a new center,
I
and
wouldn't say a new center, but this,
what would you say?
the center has collapsed and there is no replacement of it.
Okay.
Now, you might want to make the argument that in a new kind of movement, a moral center could replace the political center of old.
Well, what was also interesting, what you had said, was Trump severing the relationship with Israel and Netanyahu, and like, how Trump is made by the American people, and that Trump is also remaking the Republican Party, and that's why you had to talk about, well, the two-party system, which I think, to explain liberal democracy or a bourgeois revolution and what it produced, is also to explain what are the mechanisms that we're dealing with now while not fully achieving the Third American Revolution, which is why you had gotten into the direction or point or the conclude or how to continue the Third American Revolution, which is also part of really what you're saying about the reconfiguring of American politics, because what you're saying is that how do you achieve the revolutionary process, and what that achievement would do is also bring to the bring to this time, which is also like China, Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea, a new revolutionary state. Part of which are the revolutionary states have, like you're saying, different examples. Whether they are different because of culture, that's something separate than the difference of the stages of a revolutionary process. But the revolutionary process isn't also completed by one country or civilization in of themselves. Like just because China has achieved a certain stage in their process of state and government and relationship to the people and civilization doesn't mean that the revolutionary process or that all humanity is free. So like you're saying about an all humanity struggle for peace and democracy is important. Whether Trump can make a complete headway towards that is another question entirely. Then the purpose of a breakdown situation that the American system is also going through, and then the reconfiguration of not only the state, but the way that the ruling system would relate to the people, which Trump would understand or is understanding. So the point is that it's not that it's not really about modernity being defined by these these countries that have achieved certain state governments, but it's that modernity is defined by the revolutionary process. And Trump,
could you explain that a little?
and that modernity is defined by the revolutionary process.
That's very interesting.
Meaning that, and what I mean is that Trump is in a situation where he has to where America is going to become something new, and the old is dying, like you're saying, and and I think what's important about that is that what will happen moving forward will define a new level of consciousness in state and government relationships with people that other countries also haven't, or not that they can't, but it hasn't happened yet, or it hasn't been achieved because democracy also hasn't fulfilled itself, it hasn't completed the revolutionary process. But that's why I thought that that's what was central to what you had talked about, because like we're talking about Trump being a political phenomenon, not for the sake of like air, but that there's something new emerging, which I think everybody is paying attention to a certain point, and that Trump will also on this basis, which is also the basis of the historical development of people, like we'll have to investigate different relationships to these countries, like you have mentioned, whether that be North Korea or having a new the economic policy is true, like you're saying, Shantanu, doesn't have to do with the economics alone, but it has to do with morals or the relationship it has to democracy, basically, which is like a weird kind of word to use, but it has to do with the revolutionary process. But that being said, it like I think that's what was important about what you had given, that the future depends on democracy's relationship to peace.
Yeah.
And that that can only happen if, like you had said, Kamala is a fraud, and the Biden administration is a fraud, and the people know it. And what you have said also about the experience of the American people, whether it be because of the civil rights movement alone, is something to consider, because I don't think that maybe also Trump recognizes the immense power of that, which is also why it was important to talk about the revolutionary, or like how history has unfolded to a point where the people don't need to be educated, but that the people are in power to kind of pull more strings, whether that be behind Trump or in interests against war on the university campuses, or with social media or whatever. than almost ever before, which makes a difference between what you had said, like 1975 and now. That the consciousness of the people also has a certain power to it that maybe
Yeah. That's what I was trying to say.
yeah.
So I feel like part of where we're going and where we've been going for the past like year or so in free school is trying to work out the contours, and I feel like major component pieces of a new mode of revolutionary thought
Right.
and revolutionary science, which I think is a very large undertaking and cannot be really solved in the space of like a single conversation, which is why we talk about it a lot and return to it and are trying to work it out in various ways. And I think, yeah, one of the questions that is raised by what we're saying is if kind of the gist of Marx and Lenin's contribution to revolutionary theory is the basic notion that the state is not a thing in itself, but is an instrument for the rule of a particular class in a particular epoch of human development. I think my question is then, are we still saying that the state is the instrument for the rule of a particular class? Do we see the state in a different way? And if we see it in a different way, then how do we see it? Because we saw also, I think this is also come up in the lens of, can we define the ruling elite and the ruling class of the United States in this time simply as, let's say, the rule of the rule of like the capitalist class? Or is it more complex than that? And I think, because I feel like there's, in maybe very simplistic terms, I feel like it's very common for like leftists and Marxists to say, oh, the government is merely the employees of like the CEOs. And like kind of, those are kind of like vulgar kind of Marxist terms. And I think, like, for instance, people would point to, let's say, all of these CEOs, like these tech CEOs who are trying to now play nice with Trump and saying like, oh, actually Trump is just kind of like, the government is just the employees of the capitalist class. And I feel like that's kind of a self-fulfilling narrative in a lot of ways. And like, I agree that we're not really satisfied with that, but I think there are like important questions that are raised by I guess the critique we're making, but also the move we're trying to make of actually trying to figure out what is even the shape of the total social reality of the United States, specifically in this time. And I think, yeah, I feel like part of the benefit of reading Lenin is that like it's really nice because he's very clear about these things. Like he's not ambiguous at all, and he leaves things like very like kind of cut and dry. But then I think that also makes it possible for us to be like, oh, like he's so direct about this thing, but I don't think that fully describes the social reality that I'm living and seeing. And so, but that's not to even like put down Lenin, but I think on the flip side, it puts on you then the task of being like, okay, like, well, what do we mean? Like when we talk about a state as not just like in the traditional Leninist sense or the conventional Leninist sense, but we're still using the idea of a ruling class and like, okay, how do you define the ruling class? Are we still defining the state? Like basically kind of in the primary terms that Lenin uses as an instrument for the rule of a particular class, all of those things. And yeah, I think it's good that like we're actually like again, it's not, I feel like what we're trying to do is not something like, yeah, again, that can be like solved in the span of like one like conversation, which is also why like, yeah, even the concept of like, maybe it is time to move from the kind of conventional notion of class struggle being the animating force of history towards something which is more humanity, even just like thinking about the category of humanity. Like I think it is important, but I think, I don't know, it's just it's like something I struggle to like wrap my mind around, because I think the precedence of revolutionary thought, which has been put on the table by basically the 20th century, is so weighty, and it's so like considerable, I feel like, and it's like so significant. So yeah, I guess
I think this is very important. Just a quick thing, because you see the mistake, you can make any number of mistakes on either side, but I think one of the most catastrophic mistakes
Mhm.
was Mao's idea of the class struggle continuing under a communist government or socialist government and leading to the Cultural Revolution. But it was completely fictionalized for his political purposes, I think. So that's kind of what you see in a lot of Marxist-Leninist parties these days. Young people, no experience. But I think the state of the whole people, that we might be at a stage of history where state power in the United States, if it is to be democratic and popular or people based, will look more like the state in China, which is a state of the whole people, which is, and that's Deng Xiaoping and his quote opening up and so. But that's
Right. Because I think too, people.
By the way, that's what Yoon in South Korea was trying to avoid, because there's probably a democratic transition from the people taking place, which is also democratic for peace with North Korea and for unification. I'm sorry, this interruption.
I just feel like, yeah, we shouldn't be afraid to be like, okay, like we are making a clear departure from Lenin here.
Yes.
And maybe it's also possible that even if, let's say, the Communist Party, even like the Workers' Party of Korea, North Korea, even if obviously they are rooted in many ways in like the Marxist tradition and will not shy away from saying that, at the same time, I think it is also possible for us to say like, okay, maybe Lenin's basic assertion that the state itself is always the product of these irreconcilable class antagonisms, that theory and that assertion is not really borne out in the actual like functioning of, let's say, a society like China or even a society like North Korea. But I mean, I feel like we have to be, I guess I'm just saying that because I feel like we are making like departures, like important, like theoretical departures from like how, let's say like someone like
or maybe
Lenin.
even a synthesis,
Right.
a new synthesis.
I feel like I see it less as like a disagreement with Lenin in spirit, because I was thinking about how, well, what impressed me, I think, the most about like State and Revolution was when he was describing what it means for the state to wither away, and that basically that withering away process is a very like specific term, but basically that there will cease to be a need for human beings to oppress each other. Like the conditions that cause others to like want to oppress, to want to like steal, to want to exploit. Like when those conditions are removed, actually there can be maybe like a more natural state in which the class struggle or the class antagonisms don't exist, and therefore it actually becomes like classless. And I feel like maybe the particulars of the stages, which I feel like Lenin is very specific about, like the order in which they occur, why they have to like proceed in the order that they do. I feel like that's what has not been totally, like borne out by history. Like if you look at, like China, North Korea, like all of those states, like that state has not withered away. And I feel like the question that like we've had for, I guess, like multiple years now is, can that process occur organically or naturally in the way that like maybe Lenin or Marx like originally predicted?
Could I just make one? See, I think what Lenin was saying, that as long as there is a state, it will represent one or another class. And therefore, that until all vestiges of the previous class are eradicated, you will still need a state. That might be a point of that might be the point of real problem at this time. Because is it not possible? And this is I continue to think about our discussion with Reverend James Lawson. And it would be good to revisit it and even to transcribe parts where we talked about the state.
It's transcribed.
Oh, okay.
It's all transcribed.
If we could just lift that, because it's a long piece. But this question of does the nonviolent movement have a concept of the seizure of state power? And I think maybe we do. The forms that it would take in this society would not be the romanticization of, for example, the Russian Revolution, where the workers seized the Winter Palace, and that was a movie. That actually was a movie. But how does that go? But I hear, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a question of does nonviolence, aside from even the seizure of state power, does nonviolence have a theory of the even purpose of state power to begin with? And like, because I feel like because like the Marxist thing is so clear of like, yeah, like the state is an instrument for the oppression of one class, whether it's even like a socialist state per se is for the oppression or like quote unquote repression of like the capitalist class, which it has defeated. I think I feel like King or Gandhi would not see even the function and the purpose of the state in exactly the same way.
I don't think they would. And they would put more value upon the moral foundations of the state. Or even Baldwin would do the same. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think, oh man, so much to say.
We're going over to Barta and Shantanu's crib after this. We have a going away party for Shanti.
Yo, Kathy cracks me up.
Very necessary.
I mean, just to keep it 100. I'm sorry.
Got me distracted. Firstly, it's the thing of a whole humanity struggle is a lot to digest, but it's also the whole thing of the ceasefire and Russia, Ukraine, and the plane that crashed Osby, and we didn't even talk about the stadium today. There's just so much going on that I'm appreciative of coming to free school, because I don't think one person can handle all the stimulus, honestly. We didn't even talk about the stadium and how the billionaire class came in and told Philadelphia to do it correctly. And I think I'll start by saying I was someone who was, you mentioned Bernie Sanders fans who were disillusioned, became Marxist Leninists. Well, I was an Obama voter who was disillusioned and became a Maoist.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, for sure. That was my generation. I guess same generation, but the same process is going on. But and maybe you can correct me, but what you're suggesting sounds similar. I don't think it has to be a disagreement with Lenin or Mao. What you're suggesting sounds similar to what Mao wrote in his essay New Democracy. And it's just so interesting because he's suggesting a new democracy, meaning democracy for the people, but he suggests bringing in the national bourgeoisie as part of the state, and saying that that's not revisionist. That is the best solution to bring the most amount of people together to band. That is the objective. So, and what you're suggesting with a whole humanity struggle doesn't seem so far off
I agree with you.
from what that is, for what Henry Winston theorized when he talked about how the Democratic Party was the party of business, but it was also the party of women. It was also the party of the civil rights. It was also the party. So why not go for it at that time? But and then the other thing I wanted to, we're in the India reading group. We're reading Nehru, and it seems to be the question that he was faced with was how do you take this freedom struggle, which I think we equate it to a revolution, this nonviolent freedom struggle that seized the state and liberated the people from colonialism, and then continue that into an anti-colonial movement. And I think that's what we're discussing here today.
Yeah.
Because the similar thing happened with the civil rights movement, and I need to talk to Dwight after preschool because I said some things about religion I don't agree with, but Dwight was saying, well, what constitutes the state with Israel? It can't be religion, but the state of England is constituted by the myth of King Arthur. And my mom's British, so I love Monty Python. So I love the skit where he goes, on what basis is it that a woman hands a man from a sword from a lake?
Right.
And that's the foundation of the state. But that's the foundation of the modern state of England. So I think all going back to my Maoist roots, all idealists, all non-materialist analysis of what is the state, what constitutes the state, needs to be discarded, and that's our task, is to renew the state, but not on some foundational myth. And maybe to Dwight's point, maybe to Dwight's point, maybe it shouldn't be religion either. But the interesting thing about King and his movement was that it did reconstitute the state without resorting to violence.
Wait, can I say something about that? Because it has something to do with why you're raising the questions about the ideological either synthesis or, like you were saying, kind of like departures from Lenin. And like, I think you're making a good, like, it's something in my head too, Samir, about, well, like, why was Martin Luther King a revolutionary?
Yeah.
And I think that's a big,
This is very, I'm sorry.
no, I think so, because it has something to do that what in your bringing up of the crisis of the two-party system
Yes.
and the all-humanity movement for peace and democracy, and the terms of like a whole, like, what'd you say, a whole
State of the whole people.
state of the whole people. And for example, I don't understand ideology in a Leninist way. I understand ideology as terms of like human philosophy, or like in terms of like I understand ideology in terms of philosophy or in terms of morals. And to me, it seems like the revolutionary process, or even, for example, history itself, is also made up of whole people and human beings that have, in a sense, ideology, but not in the sense of like ideology as a party, or ideology as state lines, or like a state. And I think what's interesting now is that what you're bringing up is that there's a conflict with ideology. But part of that conflict, which is also what's moving history, is that it's the ideology that has power. Ideology is what people are thinking is also moving Trump to make decisions that are beneficial to the people, instead of the old Republican Party or the amorphous Republican Party. It's also that's what's making decisions more than it is the power of a state that is created based off of a process or a conflict of classes in of itself.
This is very interesting. I think we must return to this because this is so important going forward, especially for younger generations who are looking for a way to discuss this transition to a new democracy, to a new state. But I would like could we, I mean, I was just going to suggest that maybe we do the chat, what people are saying, but that maybe we find a way to come back to this question of the state of class conflict at this time, what it looks like, what it isn't, what it is. And I think I do agree with you that the central thing in the conflict of classes is the conflict of ideas.
I think so. More,
Mhm.
I don't know if I can say exactly more than, 'cause I'm not quite sure. Like it, because like you said, if I think in class conflict, then the liberal ruling class or the liberal, I don't know, of China would be the same as America, right? But I don't think that,
Interesting.
but I don't think that they think the same. And I also think that the question has to do with like, well, even if there are Chinese liberals, are they also white supremacists?
Yeah.
But if they're white supremacists, then that would also indicate the struggle for ideas, or what ideas are valuable, or what are revolutionary or are beneficial to a world humanity. Then it has to do with like that they should just kind of disintegrate the history itself. And you know, I think it has less to do with a disintegration of a class and more to do with the movement of ideas.
Can I just bring up two examples, not to discuss, the two examples that I would know best in terms of the establishment of a dictatorship of the proletariat in Africa was the People's Republic of the Congo and Marion Ngawabe, and the revolutionary dirge in Ethiopia and Mengistu Haile Mariam. And they could have made the mistake of abandoning the state of the whole people and trying to apply in their circumstances an ideological model, a theoretical model that fit Russia perhaps, but not them, which then isolated the revolutionaries from the people.
And I also am thinking that actually King is the proposition for an ideological and philosophical framework of
I think so.
the American quote unquote state or government.
And I think that's what we have to talk about, because we're going to have to find a way to this transit, because there is no democracy without replacing the people that control state power with representatives of the people.
I don't want to continue on this thing because I was like thinking about the event that was supposed to be tomorrow to celebrate King, or you know, life and everything.
It'll be next week.
But it's now next week. But a part of the problem is like, well, law can only kind of control or like I guess control like extremes or people who would like, you know, murder or like because of an idea.
Right.
But it's also like what will change the moral foundation of the person.
And that's the big question. That's where Baldwin comes in.
I just have a question that Ben, October Gallery, that's tomorrow.
Oh yeah, no, they had to cancel it because of the threat of snow.
Okay.
And they're doing it next week, next Sunday. Yeah. Maybe we'll do some chat. Oh, go ahead, Mac.
I just wanted to say, like, one thing, I guess, to like follow the thread of the last function, but it seems that, you know, this question reminds me of, you know, what we've been trying to talk about in terms of the civilizational question and, you know, the time of like civilizational paths to modernity at this time, and, you know, which is why, you know, to talk about the unraveling that we're seeing with you know, the Western ruling elite, the US ruling elite, and so on. This is part of the fact that the unique white path to modernity, which has been like, along with liberalism and all of it, which has been declared to be the only path towards modernity. We are at a time when that has come crashing, and this is exactly what Baldwin talks about when he says that he says that the European idea of the notion of the nation state, it has come crashing with at the shore of the question, who am I and what am I doing here? But he talks about it as the civilizational question which Europe and whiteness has failed to answer. And I think what you were saying about yes, this time where to understand the Chinese liberal, or if that can even be usefully compared with with what we know as the white liberal. But I think this is the civilizational striving has to be understood, and we are this is the to what I guess Samir was also talking about this, but this question is something that Asia is trying to face and take up, because this question of, we talk about white supremacy as a form of governance, which has played it still does play a huge role in Asia. And you go to any major city in, say, India or West Korea, or I'm sure China too, you do have these you do have vestiges of some form of whiteness that has that has persisted. But I don't think that's the same thing as to say that these societies reproduce the white supremacy social system. And this is because of there is something civilizational that the Asia is trying to uncover for, and it will have to uncover it for. Really, this is the task for Asia at this time too, and
Yes.
which is why, I guess I'm finally understanding why Raju kept saying that India needs Baldwin, because I think what Baldwin is saying is that the universal that the blues gives us is something that human civilization needs as a whole to make it step forward. And this is I mean, this is really it's an exciting time to be alive, because this question is being worked out for every civilization.
I could add to this. I want to delay our comments again.
Just go to the
And
bathroom.
when, for example, you in previous free schools even gave us the whole civilizational development of the theories of liberalism, and then now this week we get how it's concretely constituted to a certain extent in the world of America, and see that it doesn't actually even reflect the people of this country. And you have the necessity of somebody like Donald Trump to come in and outside of what currently exists in the American state, and even the world of American people, with the Trump movement, which is forcing people to organize in ways that they have not done before, given that, as we had previously discussed as well, the American people, through whiteness, have given some of their authority to the state in exchange for benefits. When I think about the revolutionary theories of the world that can bring America forward, I mean, some of it has to reflect the life world of the people, but at the same time, there has to be something, I think, more fundamental in the case of our country, given that we are not, unfortunately, I don't feel that we're particularly organized in a substantial way, which is to say that there is not this organic, highly conscious relationship that exists, that expresses something fundamental about the human being, which can be some self-interest, economic or otherwise, but nonetheless, something fundamental about the human being. And so I thought it was essential to put the category of humanity on the table as the organizing principle on which civilization has to be injected into the veins of America and brought forward. Yeah.
Maybe we can. Are you gonna?
I can, unless you want to do it.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I don't, did you click? Can you unclick the comment? Shinta?
Yeah.
Just click it again and. I'm gonna do it for you. Okay, a lot of people said good morning. Todd, Michelle Bell, Bambalai, Sharifa, Ali. They're saying that there's an Arctic blast heading into the high desert, but also to Virginia. Michelle says there's an anti-Trump rally going on in DC right now. Sharifa Ali said, I don't trust Netanyahu, Smotrich, Ben-Gvir. They're all warmongers and liars. Watch BBC I-24, which is a station, and France 24 cable stations. Bambalai 7 says, I don't necessarily think that it's a myth about Zionist lobby control, since we don't know if a side deal is presented to Netanyahu. There may well be some dirty dealings. And BK also says, like, they don't want to celebrate too soon. Let's see. Sharifa says, Free Palestine. USA News ignored the demand for the freedom of Palestinians in Israel by Hamas. Yes, bring back Palestinians in other lands. Netanyahu said near October 7th that Palestinians would suffer for generations. Apartheid was always real in Israel and Palestine. Blinken is pro-Israel and blind to Israeli lies. But Michelle says, I agree with Jeremiah. The ceasefire is a breakthrough moment, no matter the outcome. The dot on the timeline of history remains. Sharifa Ali says, everything you say is so true. But then Bambalai 7 is still advising caution. The proof is in the pudding. I will not underestimate those acute Zionist minds out there. American power, economy, and influence in the Middle East is in the mix. But it's true that the myths are dissolving as we're becoming aware that the king was actually naked. Morality must exist in the bare bone and not in a thought process. Empathy has to fight against economy. There are some bad people in the government gaining power through dirty dealings. Let's see. Fired Play says, I'm starting to watch late today. It feels like to preserve white supremacy, maybe this alleged ceasefire is connected to that. Let's see. Todd asks us to back this session up.
Yeah.
And Bambalai 7 says, you have to speak the truth. China is a powerful nation and the dollar is in dire straits. We can only be full in the belly. Materialist, flashy dreams remind me of the magpies collecting shiny stuff to build their nest. So I would collect shiny stuff and make a fat nest. But they think that capitalism needs to be supervised. But then we had issues with our stream. And it seems like people heard us crunching, but we weren't really eating. But I think there's just a lot of background noise on the stream. Steve Nelson says, nobody gets to actually have a voice anymore because Robert's Rule of Order takes educations and citizens holding it accountable. Social media messed up the world to oblivion.
So Justice Roberts, Supreme Court Justice.
I thought it was Robert's Rule of Order. No, it's like a thing. It's like a parliamentarian thing. The National Honor Society does it. Todd Doherty says the ruling class has many tools at its disposal. And then Dexter Williams says, I'm watching the beginning of this. Trump won due to an ongoing cultural fight to preserve American culture. That's why the homeschool movement is bigger now than ever. And then everybody was thinking that they were eating because they thought that we were eating, but we weren't eating.
There's not a
But I
single
think,
piece of
yeah,
food
sorry
on the
for
table.
the background whistling.
We'll figure out the video issues as well after the live stream. Sorry that it's not working.
Sorry.
But it's archived on YouTube and Facebook, so people can.
Yeah. At least the audio.
The audio.
We lost the audio for the last
Yeah.
What?
All
No,
right.
video.
the videos.
I'm hungry.
Yeah. Okay, y'all.
Yes,
It's
there's
time
no
to
eating.
put an end to this
All right.
All right.
Okay, we'll be back.
next week.
All right, what are we eating? I'm hungry.
We're going over